Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving home from work one night, about 11:30 p.m. The roads were quiet, just a few cars here and there. I usually keep my phone on silent while I'm driving, but when I pulled into the driveway and grabbed my phone, I saw I had a new voicemail. I didn't recognize the number, but my voicemail list showed it was from my own number. That's when things started to feel weird. I hit play, and it was me. My voice, panicked and confused, talking about a light that won't let me move. I don't remember leaving that message at all. And the weirdest part? There was no call in my recent calls list. No outgoing or incoming call logged, just the voicemail. I sat there on my couch listening again, and it was definitely me. Same voice, same tone, but I had zero memory of it. The message started with me saying, "I don't know what this is. It's just a light. It's right there, and I can't move. It won't let me move. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." The way I said it, you could hear how rattled I was. Then it cut out. That was it. I kept replaying it, trying to remember if I'd been messing with my phone or if maybe I'd recorded it accidentally. But nothing clicked. I don't talk in my sleep, and I never make calls or messages without meaning to. Plus, like I said, no call records anywhere. The night before, I remembered, I had gone out for a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. It was late, maybe 10 p.m. or so, and the streetlights were dim and sparse. I don't usually do that, but I wanted some fresh air. I never take my phone on those walks, usually leave it inside. But something about that night felt off. When I got to the corner by the park, I noticed this faint glow way off in the distance, near the tree line. It wasn't like any light I'd seen before. It wasn't a street lamp, and there were no cars or houses with their lights on there. The glow was pale and steady, almost bluish-white. It didn't flicker or move. Just hung there, about the height of a tree. I figured it might be some kind of flashlight or someone's phone light, but I couldn't see anyone around. The park was empty. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, but the light seemed to follow me. Not by moving closer or anything obvious, but if I stopped and looked, it was always in roughly the same spot relative to me. I felt my skin crawl, like I was being watched. But there was no one there. No footsteps. No sounds. Nothing. Just that light. I hurried back home, doors locked behind me. I told myself it was just some guy messing with a drone or some other prank, but it didn't feel right. That was the last thing I remembered clearly until I heard that voicemail. After hearing the message, I went through my phone settings and checked the audio logs, permissions, anything that might explain how the recording happened, but everything looked normal. No apps were active that could have done it. And I had no reason to record myself like that. I also thought maybe someone hacked my phone and left the message, but that made less sense the more I thought about it. Why record a panicked message in my own voice if they could just call or text me? The next day, I kept thinking about the light and the voicemail. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see that same glow in the distance. At work, I was distracted, almost convinced people were watching me, or that something was lurking just out of sight. I kept checking my phone for more strange messages or calls, but nothing. I told a close friend about the voicemail, played it for him, and he looked as confused as I felt. He said maybe it was some kind of glitch or a virus, but nothing like that had ever happened to me before. I tried to put it behind me, but over the next few days, little things kept piling up. Lights in my house flickered randomly, the TV would turn on by itself for a second, and I could swear I heard a faint humming noise outside my window late at night. I checked outside every time, but never saw anything. One night, I decided to record my own voice, talking about the experience, trying to make sense of it all. When I played it back, the recording had a faint background noise I didn't notice while recording, a low, steady hum, almost like a vibration. It reminded me of the weird light from the park, the one that wouldn't let me move. I went back to the park to see if I could find the light again, but the spot was dark and quiet. No glow, no hum, nothing. just the usual streetlights and the rustling of trees. I don't know what happened that night or how that voicemail got on my phone. All I know is I heard myself say things I don't remember feeling about something I don't remember seeing. And that light, it's like it left a mark on me even if I can't explain it. Since then, I keep my phone close and try not to walk alone at night. The voicemail's still there. Sometimes I play it just to remind myself that what happened wasn't all in my head, but I'm not sure I want to hear it too often. I'd been dealing with insomnia on and off for years, but that month was the worst it had been in a while. I'd stopped even trying to go to bed at a normal time. Most nights, I'd just sit in the living room with a book or something on in the background until I started to nod off. Sometimes that didn't happen until almost sunrise. This happened in March. I remember because it was cold, but not quite freezing, and I'd started using the little space heater in the living room again. My house is one of those old one-stories with thin walls and bad insulation. It's usually quiet at night, no neighbors close by, just woods past the backyard. That night, I'd been watching some old rerun on mute while flipping through a magazine. Nothing interesting, just killing time. The only lights on were the one over the kitchen sink and a little lamp next to the couch. It was around 3 in the morning, and I was about ready to give sleep another shot. Then the light came through the window. It wasn't headlights. I know how headlights move. There's a curve in the road before my driveway, and when someone turns in late, the light sweeps across the trees and the side of the house. This didn't move like that. It didn't sweep or angle. It just bloomed. Bright, white, almost bluish, and held steady. It was coming from behind the house, somewhere past the backyard. I got up and went to the kitchen window to look out. From there, I could usually see the shed and part of the woods beyond. But the light was so bright, it blew everything out. The trees were just silhouettes. There was no source I could make out. It was like a stadium light had been switched on, but there was no pole, no hum, nothing. Then, right as I was staring at it, everything in the house blinked. The lamp next to the couch shut off and came back on. The TV screen went black for half a second, then rebooted like it had been unplugged. The microwave beeped like the power had gone out. But the thing that stuck with me was the oven clock. It was one of those digital clocks that resets when the power flickers. Normally, it just blinks 12 until I reset it, but this time it was blinking 3:17. Same with the clock on the cable box. Not 12. It was blinking 3:17. I walked into the hallway and checked the alarm clock in my bedroom. Same thing, 3:17, blinking. That one had a battery backup. It wasn't supposed to reset unless I physically unplugged it. I stood there for a minute, just trying to make sense of that. The power had clearly flickered, just long enough to mess with the electronics, but somehow every clock picked up right where it left off, just blinking instead of holding steady. The heater was still on. The fridge hadn't stopped. My phone showed 3:17 too, but that made sense. It didn't blink though, just stayed on like nothing had happened. When I went back to the kitchen window, the light outside was gone. I turned off the lamp, hoping my eyes would adjust better. Everything outside looked normal again. I opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit me immediately, but I stayed there a minute or two, just listening. The woods were dead quiet. That sounds like nothing, but if you live near trees, you know that's weird. Usually there's something, wind through the branches, night birds, the occasional rustle from a raccoon or possum. But that night, nothing. Just silence, like the air was holding itself still. I should have gone back inside, but I kept scanning the trees for movement. There wasn't any. The shed was closed. Nothing looked out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. That the light hadn't just been a weird power thing, that it had come from something. Eventually, I went back inside and locked the door, more out of habit than anything else. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lamp off, just kind of staring out the front window. Next morning, I checked the backyard in the daylight. Ground was still a little muddy from rain earlier that week, so I figured if someone or something had been back there, I'd see some kind of tracks. There weren't any. No footprints, no tire marks, nothing knocked over. The leaves under the trees were undisturbed. The only thing that stood out was the smell. Faint, but there. Like hot metal. The kind of smell you get when you run a space heater too long and the dust burns off. That was the first night. The second time it happened, I was already in bed, tossing and turning like usual. It was a few days later. I hadn't been thinking about the light anymore, figured maybe a transformer had blown out back and the timing was just weird. I didn't see the light directly that time. It started with a hum, low and deep. Not mechanical, more like a pressure, like the sound your ears pick up when something changes around you, but no one else hears it. Then the hallway light turned on by itself. It wasn't on a motion sensor, just a regular switch. I sat up and stared at it for a second, heart thudding, and then the bathroom fan turned on. No light, just the fan. I got out of bed and opened the bedroom door. The light in the hallway was still on, and the bathroom fan was humming steadily, even though the switch was off. I flipped it a few times, nothing happened. Then, right as I stepped into the hallway, the fan stopped. So did the hallway light. And then, for a split second, every light in the house came on. Bright, blinding. Lamp in the living room, ceiling light in the kitchen, closet lights I never even used. They stayed on maybe a second and then everything went dark again. When the power came back, every clock was blinking 3:17. I checked my phone. It said 3:27. That's when I started feeling watched. I can't explain that part well. It wasn't like someone was in the room with me, more like something was waiting outside, just out of sight. Like if I opened the blinds too fast, I'd see it. But I didn't open the blinds. I didn't look outside. I sat in the hallway until the sun started coming up. Then I went back to the kitchen, made coffee, and didn't say a word about it to anyone. A week went by. Nothing happened. I reset all the clocks, stopped using the space heater, started keeping the blinds drawn tight at night, even in the bedroom. Still didn't sleep much, but nothing flickered. No lights, no sounds, no smell. Then last Thursday, I was taking out the trash just after midnight. It was quiet, cold again. As I turned back toward the house, I noticed something reflected in the kitchen window. Just a little flash, like a glint of something metal, behind me. I spun around fast. Nothing was there. Just the shed, the trees, the yard. But when I looked back at the window, my reflection was gone. It came back a second later, like there'd been a delay. I went back inside, locked the door, turned off every light, and waited. The clocks never blinked that night. But I noticed something else. They were all exactly 2 minutes slow. I run a rural mail route up in northern Missouri. Been doing it for about 9 years. It's a quiet job, mostly driving. I like the routine, same roads, same people, same boxes every morning. Not much changes out there. You get used to knowing when a farmer's going to be in the field or which dog is going to chase your truck. There's something comforting about it, I guess. There's this stretch of gravel road, Stony Creek Lane, that's always been a little out of the way. Only a handful of houses on it, mostly older folks. It's narrow and hilly and lined with trees that haven't been trimmed back in a while. I hit it about halfway through my route, right around 9:30 every morning. One of the mailboxes there always kind of stood out to me. Not because it was unusual, it was pretty standard, black metal, a little rusted around the latch, but it was old. Been there probably 30-40 years, and the post was leaning a little from frost heave. Belonged to a woman named Janice. She passed away 2 years ago, but her son, Eric, kept the place and had the mail forwarded there maybe once a week. He wasn't around much. Monday morning, I drove up to the box like normal. There wasn't any outgoing mail, but I had one letter to drop off. I opened the flap, slid the envelope in, and closed it, firmly. I remember doing it because the latch sticks unless you really push it. It made the usual little snap when it shut. I backed away and continued the route. Tuesday, same deal. One envelope. I got out, opened the flap, and it was already open. The flap was just hanging there. That wasn't totally unheard of. Sometimes sometimes someone checks their mail and forgets to close it. But I hadn't seen any fresh tire tracks or footprints in the gravel around it, and I knew I'd shut it the day before. I told myself I probably hadn't latched it all the way. Maybe I was distracted. I put the new letter in, made sure I gave the flap a good hard push, and watched it click into place. Drove off. Wednesday morning, I started getting a weird feeling, even before I hit Stony Creek. Don't know why. The sky was overcast and everything felt still, like the whole area was holding its breath. I pulled up to the same box, and sure enough, the flap was open again, just dangling there. I stopped the truck, got out, and stood in front of it for a minute. There wasn't any wind. The air was dead still. The flap hadn't blown open. There was no way. I bent down and checked the latch. It wasn't broken. Worked the same as it always had. Then I looked inside. At first I thought it was just debris, like maybe someone had tossed a soda tab or a bit of wire in there. But the thing at the back of the box wasn't trash. It was a small, smooth metal object. Maybe the size of a golf ball, but not round, more like an uneven oval, like a river stone. It wasn't shiny, just dull gray, like brushed steel. No markings, no seams. Just sitting there like someone had placed it carefully at the back. I didn't touch it, just stared at it for a while, trying to figure out what it could be. It wasn't a key or a pendant or anything normal. No chain, no clip. I took out my phone and snapped a photo, then looked around. No cars, no people. The trees around the road were quiet. No birds, no squirrels. Just that low, overcast sky and the weird quiet. I left the object where it was, closed the flap again, double-checked the latch, and got back in the truck. I kept glancing in the mirror as I drove off. That afternoon, I called the local postmaster, told him about the mailbox staying open. I didn't mention the object, wasn't even sure how to describe it. He just said maybe someone was tampering with it. Kids or something. He'd asked the property owner to check. Thursday morning, I hit the road like normal. The rest of the route was fine. Dogs barked, farmers waved. Everything felt normal until I turned onto Stony Creek again. The trees felt too close, like they'd crept in somehow overnight. I slowed as I approached the mailbox. The flap was closed. I pulled up, put the truck in park, and just sat there looking at it. I opened the door, walked over, and gave it a gentle tug. It opened smoothly, no mail inside, no object either. I looked behind the post, in the ditch, up into the trees. Nothing. Not a footprint. The gravel wasn't disturbed. It was like nobody had been there at all. I don't know what I expected to feel, but I remember thinking how empty the air felt. That same pressure, like the world had been hollowed out. It's hard to explain. I finished the route without really registering the rest of it. That night, I checked the photo on my phone. It was still there, blurry, not very helpful, but the object was visible at the back of the mailbox. I showed it to my wife, but she thought it was just a rock or scrap metal. Told me I was overthinking it. Friday, I drove out again. Same box. Flap was closed this time. I opened it. Nothing inside. I left the new mail, closed it hard, and kept moving. That weekend, I drove by the house on my own time, just out of curiosity. The driveway was still overgrown. No car tracks, no signs anyone had been there. I walked up and knocked on the door. No answer. Everything looked the same as always, still, empty, undisturbed. I haven't seen the object again. Not in that box, not anywhere else. But I always check that latch now. Twice, sometimes 3 times. I don't know why. Just feels wrong when I don't. I was out in the Mojave that weekend. I'd driven up from San Diego Friday morning, took some back roads past Barstow, and set up camp a little ways off a dirt trail I'd found on satellite maps. I go out there every few months to shoot long exposures and time lapses, just something I like doing. Quiet, no light pollution, stars bright as hell. I've got a decent DSLR setup, a couple lenses, tripod, intervalometer, the usual stuff. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep me occupied. That night I'd set up around 8:30, right after the sun dipped behind the hills. No wind, clear sky, perfect conditions. By 9:45 I had the tripod planted about 30 yards from my truck facing northeast. Got a wide shot of the sky with some Joshua trees in the foreground. I let that run on an interval, then took the other camera and started walking around for singles. Shots of the horizon, close-ups of the brush, some angled back toward my truck with the sky behind it. I try to get a mix, you know? Around 10:30, I noticed something weird out past the hills. Thought it was a plane at first. A white light, blinking slow, maybe a mile or 2 off, but it wasn't moving, just hanging there. I remember stopping mid-frame and waiting for it to change position. Nothing. No sound either. I stood there watching it for maybe 10 minutes. It'd blink once every 3 or 4 seconds. No pattern, just a slow, irregular pulse. I've seen a lot of planes out there, military ones too, but this thing wasn't acting like anything I recognized. Still, I didn't think much of it. Figured maybe it was a drone or some tower I hadn't seen during the day. I aimed my long lens at it and snapped a few shots. Couldn't get a clear focus. It was just too far, too dim. When I zoomed in on the screen, it looked like a dot with a faint ring around it, like glare or lens flare, but not exactly. It didn't line up with any light sources. Eventually I moved on, walked about 50 yards west to get some shots of a ridgeline. That's when I noticed something strange in the viewfinder. Every photo had this blur in it. Same spot, dead center. At first I thought the lens was smudged. I checked, clean, swapped lenses. Blur was still there. I switched to a different body, thinking maybe something was off with the sensor. Same thing. No matter which direction I pointed, north, south, toward my truck, away from it, there was this faint, soft-edged blur hovering just left of center. It didn't look like dust or a scratch. It was consistent. Fixed in place on the frame, not the landscape. I even turned the camera 90 degrees. Same blur, same spot on the image. It creeped me out a bit. I've had gear issues before, but nothing like this. I took off the lens, looked through it, clear. Looked at the sensor with a flashlight. Nothing. I even took a few photos with the lens cap on to see if it was a light leak or something. Those came out black. No blur. I walked back toward the truck. The blinking light was still there, but it shifted lower, closer to the horizon. Still no sound. Still no movement. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. By 11:30, I started packing up. Not because I was scared exactly, but the gear wasn't behaving and I felt off, like something was watching. Hard to explain. The desert's quiet and I'm used to that, but this felt different, stifling, like the silence was pressing in. As I folded up the tripod, I noticed the interior lights in the truck had come on. I hadn't unlocked it. They just turned on. I walked over and checked the doors, still locked. Lights went off as I got close. I stood there staring at it, waiting to hear the click of a relay or anything mechanical. Nothing. I got in and started the engine. No issues, but the radio was on a different station, some static-filled AM band I never use. I didn't touch it. Just drove a few hundred yards back toward the trail and parked again, thinking I'd sleep in the cab and head out early. I couldn't sleep. The blinking light was still visible, lower now, almost at the edge of a hill. I tried to ignore it, pulled my jacket over my head, but it was like my body wouldn't settle. That feeling again, like I was being watched, but not from one direction, from all sides. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up just before dawn. Pale light on the horizon, sky turning purple. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no insects, nothing. Usually there's some activity at that hour, even out there, coyotes, crickets, something. But it was dead still. I stepped out and checked around the truck. Nothing out of place. I walked back to where I'd been shooting. My footprints from the night before were still visible, but the ground around the tripod spot was smooth, like brushed. The tripod legs always leave small indentations in the dust, but there was no sign I'd even set up there. It looked freshly swept. That set me on edge. I checked the SD cards again. Most of the images were intact. The long exposure set from the early evening came out fine, but every single photo after I noticed the blinking light, every frame, had that blur. Same spot, same size, even the ones shot on different cameras. I zoomed in on one of them. The blur wasn't just soft, there were faint edges inside it. Not shapes exactly, but darker streaks, almost like movement caught mid-frame, but always in the same place, regardless of where the camera was pointed. Even when I took that photo facing completely south, the blur was still hanging to the left of center. It made no sense. I tried layering the images in editing software when I got home, thinking maybe I could isolate whatever was causing it. But the blur didn't move. It stayed in the same coordinates on every frame, even though the landscape and stars shifted, like it wasn't in the scene, it was on the sensor. But it couldn't have been. I used 2 cameras, different lenses, cleaned both, checked everything. The strangest part was the timestamps. I usually shoot in bursts or on an interval, so I know how long things take. But between 10:47 and 11:08, there were no images. Just a gap, no files. The camera didn't shut off, there was no break in the numbering. It just didn't record anything for 21 minutes. Then it picked back up like nothing happened. I've been through those folders 100 times now. Tried converting the RAWs, checking hidden files, recovering deleted data. Nothing. Just that window of nothing. I haven't gone back to that spot since. I still shoot, just closer to town. I don't even bring both cameras anymore. That night wasn't dramatic or anything. No lights chasing me, no hallucinations. But it stuck with me. Something wasn't right out there. The blur's still in the photos. Doesn't go away. Doesn't get worse. Just hangs there. A smudge that doesn't belong. I heard it first around midnight. This soft humming like a distant drone or maybe a machine running quietly but not quite. It wasn't steady. More like it pulsed in and out, low enough that you had to really listen to catch it. I was lying in bed, the kind of night where everything outside is still and you notice sounds you usually don't. I figured maybe it was a neighbor's generator or some construction far off, but this felt different. It wasn't loud or harsh, just kind of there. I got up and went to the window by my bed. The blinds were half closed, but I cracked them open a little to peek outside. My house is on the edge of a neighborhood, right where the trees start. You can see the dark outline of the tree line against the night sky, and beyond that, nothing but more trees. That's when I saw the lights. 3 of them hovering just above the treetops, spaced out evenly. They were round, like big orbs, and glowed with this pale white light that had a slight blue tint. They weren't moving fast, almost just drifting there, but steady enough to be deliberate. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe it was some weird reflection or car lights off in the distance, but the position stayed the same. The humming seemed to get louder for a second, then faded. I watched for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it. The lights didn't blink or flash like aircraft or drones. They just glowed almost softly like lanterns. I wanted to grab my phone, but I hesitated. My hand felt sticky, and there was this weird pressure in the back of my head, like when you're trying to remember a dream but can't quite reach it. The humming was almost hypnotic, making me feel lightheaded. I closed the blinds and sat down, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe some kind of weather balloon or those cheap drone light shows people do sometimes. I even joked to myself that I was losing it. But then it started again. The humming, louder this time, closer. I couldn't ignore it. I went back to the window and pulled the blinds up enough to see clearly. The 3 lights were still there in the same spot, just above the tree line, no movement at all. I felt this sudden impulse to go outside and check it out. I know that sounds dumb. What could I really do? But it was like my body was moving on its own. I grabbed my phone and keys, threw on a jacket, and headed for the front door. The house was completely silent, except for the humming, which I could now hear clearly on the porch. When I cracked open the door, it stopped instantly. The air outside felt cold and still, almost too still. I stepped out, scanning the sky where the lights had been. Nothing. No glow, no sign of anything at all. I looked around, but the street was empty, the trees dark and motionless. The humming didn't come back. I stayed out there for a while, just staring into the night, but the 3 lights were gone without a trace. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch with my phone in my lap. I kept listening, but all I could hear was the normal night sounds. Distant dogs, a car passing by, leaves rustling. The next morning, I checked outside again. No marks on the ground, no unusual sounds. Nothing to explain what I saw or heard. I haven't told anyone. Even writing this now, it feels strange to put it into words. I keep wondering if it was a trick of the mind, some weird optical illusion paired with a strange sound. But I know what I saw. Those 3 lights, just floating there in the dark, and the humming that stopped as soon as I opened the door. That's what happened. I don't have answers. I woke up to the zipper of my tent being undone. I'm not even sure how I noticed it. Maybe the cool night air brushing against my face, or the faint rustle of fabric. It was just barely cracked open, like someone had slipped it down a few inches and then stopped. I lay there for a second, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, but the air was calm. no breeze at all. I wasn't expecting anyone to be around. I had picked a spot deep in the woods, way off the trail, thinking I'd have the place to myself. It was the kind of quiet that feels thick, like it's holding its breath. I didn't want to move at first. It was dark, probably around 3 a.m. The moon was behind clouds, so I couldn't see much beyond the tent's flap, but I could feel my heart ticking louder than usual. Finally, I forced myself to sit up and peek out. The ground was soft with dew, the grass flattened in places where I had set up camp. Then I saw the prints, boot prints. Big ones. They started right at the edge of my tent, as if whoever was out there had just unzipped it and stepped out. I swear, the prints were fresh. The soil was damp from last week's rain, and these prints were sharp-edged, not like the blurry ones animals make. They headed out into the field beyond my campsite, the grass flattened under the sole, stepping carefully but deliberately. I grabbed my flashlight off the floor and shined it along the trail. The prints went maybe a dozen yards, then just stopped, like whoever made them vanished or turned invisible. I scanned the field with the beam, but it was empty, just tall grass bending slightly in one spot where the prints ended. No broken twigs, no disturbed leaves, nothing to show where the person could have gone. I was frozen for a moment. I debated if I should get out and follow, but part of me didn't want to draw attention or walk into something I couldn't handle alone. So I backed inside the tent and zipped it shut again, careful this time. My hands were shaking. I lay back down, but I couldn't get the image out of my head. The prints, the open zipper, the sudden silence outside. The weird thing was, nothing else seemed touched. My pack was where I left it, the fire pit cold but undisturbed, no broken branches near the tent. Whoever had been there hadn't taken anything or made a sound I could hear. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of animal or maybe a weird wind that moved the zipper. But those prints, there was no mistaking them for anything natural. I stayed awake the rest of the night, flashlight by my side, ears straining for any noise. When the sky started to lighten, I unzipped the tent and looked outside again. The prints were still there, but now the grass around them looked oddly flattened, like someone had stepped down carefully, not walking like a normal person. I didn't see anything unusual in the sky or the woods. No strange lights, no sounds. I packed up quickly and left the site. Even now, I can't explain what happened. I didn't feel threatened, exactly, just watched. Like something was there but choosing not to show itself. I've gone back to camping plenty since then, but I've never had anything like that happen again. I was running a load from Kansas City to Phoenix, just a regular run I'd done a dozen times before. Nothing special about it. Left late in the afternoon and planned to overnight at a rest stop outside Amarillo. I always park at the same one when I'm headed that direction. Safe, quiet, well lit enough that you don't get spooked walking to the bathroom at night. That stretch of highway isn't bad if you're used to it. Long, flat, not much in the way of scenery. I remember listening to a baseball game on the radio until it faded out somewhere past Liberal. After that, I put on one of those old true crime podcasts and just zoned out. I wasn't tired yet, but I figured I'd pull off around midnight and grab a few hours before the sun came up. I remember checking the clock. It was just before 12:30 a.m. when I pulled into the rest stop. I backed into a spot next to another rig, turned off the engine, cracked the windows a bit, and left the seat reclined. I didn't bother going inside or getting food. I wasn't hungry. Just set an alarm for 5, threw my jacket over myself like a blanket, and closed my eyes. The next thing I remember is waking up in the exact same position. Still buckled in, still reclined. The windows were up though, which I don't remember doing. The weird thing was how cold it was. Not just the air, I mean the truck. Engine stone cold. Dashboard dark. No hum, no tick of cooling metal, nothing. It felt like I'd been parked there for hours longer than I should have been. I looked at my phone. It said 5:41 a.m. Fine, I thought. I overslept. No big deal. But the cab felt off. The kind of cold where it sinks in behind your ribs. I started the engine. Took a second longer than usual to turn over, but it caught. Then I saw the receipt. It was sitting on the passenger seat, not crumpled or stuck to anything. Just neatly lying there like someone placed it. Gas station receipt. I picked it up without really thinking, figuring maybe it'd flown in from the glove box or something. It was from a place called Tularosa. Paid for at 3:07 a.m., $117.43 for diesel. I'd never heard of Tularosa. Checked the address. It was in New Mexico. Way off my route. That didn't make sense. I hadn't left the rest stop. I was sure of that. I opened the logbook and checked my own notes. Last entry was at 12:28 a.m., parked for rest. Nothing after that. No drive time, no fuel stop, nothing. I flipped through the receipts I keep clipped behind the visor. No Tularosa in there either. I pulled out my GPS and looked up the station. It was real. Small town, tiny fuel stop on the edge of a highway that didn't lead anywhere I'd need to go. So how the hell did I get a receipt from there? I checked the odometer next. It was up. By a lot. Something like 240 miles more than when I'd parked. My route hadn't changed and the tank was nearly full, even though I knew I hadn't fueled up the day before. I sat there just staring at the dash. I didn't feel groggy. I didn't feel drugged. No headache. No hangover. I'd had water and a gas station coffee before getting behind the wheel the previous afternoon. Nothing that should have knocked me out or made me forget anything. I got out and did a walk around. The truck looked fine. No dents, no scratches. Tires all good. No mud or bugs that suggest I'd been driving through the night. The rig next to me was gone. I went inside the rest stop and grabbed a coffee. The woman behind the counter didn't remember seeing me come in earlier, but that wasn't weird. I didn't stand out. I asked her if there was a clock in the place that reset overnight. She gave me a look like I was trying to trick her or something. Said no, nothing had gone out. No power issues. I sat in the cab for a while after that, tried to retrace what could have happened. Maybe I was sleep driving. Maybe I got up and fueled without remembering. But that made no sense. I'd have to have driven 4 hours to get there and back, and somehow returned to the same rest stop, parked perfectly, and buckled myself back in, all without waking up. Also, I checked the timestamp again. 3:07 a.m., that's right in the middle of when I should have been asleep. If I left right after fueling, I'd have barely gotten back in time for the 5:41 wake up. But here's the part that really got under my skin. I don't remember dreaming. Usually when I fall asleep in the cab, especially when I'm exhausted, I get these vivid half dreams. Road sounds blending with voices from the radio, that kind of thing. This time, it was just black. Like nothing happened at all between turning off the engine and opening my eyes. And I still had my seatbelt on. Who falls asleep, gets out, drives 4 hours, pumps gas, then climbs back in and fastens the belt before blacking out again? I started checking my dash cam footage. It loops every 12 hours, but I keep backups on a thumb drive. The file from that night was corrupted, just that one. Everything before and after it played fine. The backup camera log said playback error and gave a timestamp of 2:59 a.m. where the file cut off. Nothing after. Like someone pulled the plug right then. I tried not to think about it the rest of the day. Just made my deliveries, drove the route like normal, but every time I looked at that receipt, my skin crawled. I still have it. It's in my glove box, folded in half. I've compared it to other gas station receipts. Same format, same thermal paper, nothing special. Just a clean printout, time-stamped in the middle of the night in a place I swear I never went. I checked the map again later. If I had driven to Tularosa and back, it would have been around 480 miles, round trip. The odometer difference lined up too close for comfort. I looked up that gas station on Street View. It's there, same name on the receipt, same pumps. But when I zoomed in on the address listed at the top of the receipt, something was off. It wasn't the station's actual address, just a string of numbers, no street name. I called the place later that week, asked if they had cameras. The guy who answered just said, "Not since the storm." I asked what storm. He said it knocked out a bunch of power in early March. That was 3 days before I got the receipt. I asked if anyone was working that night around 3 a.m. 3A, he said they close at 11, open again at 6. No one's there in between, but the receipt clearly had a timestamp and a register number, like it'd been printed legit. He asked for the transaction number. I read it off. He paused, then said, "That's not one of ours." I didn't press him, just hung up. That was 6 months ago. I've run the same route since, but I won't stop at that rest stop anymore. I'll push an extra hour if I have to. Nothing else like it has happened again. But every time I wake up in the cab, I check the seat next to me. I don't even realize I'm doing it half the time. Once, I found a folded napkin there with nothing on it, just sitting neatly like it'd been placed. That's when I started locking the doors while I sleep, even at rest stops, even in daylight. I was working a late shift, fixing power lines over this valley that's pretty remote. Usually it's just me out there, the hum of the transformers, and the occasional bird or coyote at night. Um, that part of the job is normal, quiet, maybe a little lonely, but nothing weird ever happens. That night, I got called out because of some interference reported on the lines. It was just after midnight when I pulled into the service road, my truck rattling over the gravel. The sky was clear, moon almost full, and the air was dry and cold. I grabbed my gear, helmet, gloves, the usual, and headed up the hill where the main lines ran. I like to bring my spotting scope sometimes. It's usually for checking the lines up close or scanning for animals that might mess with the equipment. So I had it in my bag that night. Nothing special. After about an hour of climbing poles and tightening cables, I paused on this ridge overlooking the valley. The whole town below was dark except for a few scattered lights. I was just taking a breather and looked up with the scope, aiming it toward the far end of the valley. That's when I saw it. Hovering maybe 500 feet above the valley floor was this shape. It was pitch black and triangular. No lights, no sound, just this flat, solid shape, like a piece of the night itself cut out and hung in the air. The edges were sharp but blurred a bit, like looking through a foggy window. It wasn't moving, just hanging there, perfectly still. I blinked, half expecting it to be a trick of the light or some kind of shadow from the hills, but it stayed exactly where it was. I lifted the scope for a better look. When I focused on it, ready to get a closer look through the lens, it disappeared. Just like that. 1 second it was there, the next, nothing. No noise, no flash, no disturbance in the air. The spot where it had been was empty, just the stars and the dark valley. I lowered the scope, confused. I looked around, half expecting to see something else, maybe an aircraft or a drone, but there was nothing. The valley was silent except for the usual night sounds, wind through the trees, distant traffic. I kept scanning with the scope for a few minutes, but the shape never came back. It was like it had never been there at all. The whole thing felt off. I thought about radioing in, but it wasn't exactly a safety hazard or anything I could report. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to say anything. What would I even call it? A shadow? A glitch? I packed up and started walking back down the hill. My flashlight beam was steady, but my hands felt kind of clammy. The weird part wasn't just seeing the thing, it was how normal everything else was. The stars, the wind, the quiet. Nothing changed except that shape, hanging there and then gone. I kept checking over my shoulder as I made my way back to the truck, feeling like something might be watching from the trees, but there was no one, no footprints, no sounds. When I got home, I looked through the photos I'd taken earlier that night. Nothing unusual, no shapes or shadows, no blurs, just the usual shots of the hills and the sky. I asked a coworker if they'd ever seen anything strange on the job, and he just laughed it off. Said I was working too many night shifts. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'm just seeing things when I'm tired and alone in the dark. But I can't shake the feeling that the shape was real. That thing, whatever it was, didn't belong there. It wasn't a plane or a helicopter. It didn't make noise or have lights, just this silent black triangle watching the valley. I haven't gone back out there alone since that night. The power lines need fixing, but I'm waiting until there's someone with me. Not because I'm scared of heights or the work, but because something about that shape felt wrong. Like it was a part of the night that didn't want to be seen. I don't know what I saw. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from a drone or something experimental, but I don't think so. It was too solid, too still. And when I put the scope on it, it vanished without a sound. It was around 2:30 in the morning, mid-October. I was on my third straight night of line painting, out on Route 219, just north of Clymer. If you've ever driven that stretch, you know it's pretty dead that time of night. We'd split up shifts after midnight. One guy in the lead truck with the stencil rig, and me trailing behind in the safety vehicle, hazard lights going. We were doing center lines and some patchwork reflectors. Nothing major, just routine stuff before the frost came in and wrecked the roads again. I was running about 25 miles an hour, keeping a steady distance behind the lead. Nobody else on the road, just us. About an hour in, I noticed headlights behind me. At first, I thought it might have been a state trooper pulling up, which happens sometimes. They like to check in if they see us out there late. But the lights didn't gain or lose distance. They just stayed in the rear view, steady. I radioed up to James, the guy running the lead truck, and asked if he saw anyone behind me on his mirror cams. He said no, nothing. That was weird because we were on a long, flat stretch, straight view for a good quarter mile. If he couldn't see them, they had to be pretty far back. But they didn't look far in my mirror. They looked maybe 2 car lengths behind me. Bright, like someone forgot to dip their brights. I slowed a little, figured I'd let them pass. Maybe some impatient driver didn't want to be stuck behind a road crew. I pulled over just a bit onto the shoulder, enough to let someone squeak by if they wanted. No one passed. The lights vanished the second I crossed the white line and slowed below 10 miles per hour. Just gone. I turned off the radio for a second, thinking maybe I was seeing some weird glare off the stencils behind me. Sat there with the truck idling and looked in all 3 mirrors. Nothing. I eased back onto the road and kept driving. Maybe 5 minutes later, the lights came back. Same distance behind me, same height off the road, same brightness. Not swerving or moving fast, just sitting there, steady, like they were being careful not to get too close. I radioed James again. He still said he didn't see anything. This time I kept driving, tried not to look back. But the weird thing was my mirrors weren't picking up any kind of car shape, just the lights. Normally you can make out a grill or a windshield reflection or something, even with crappy night vision. But this was just 2 lights, white, a little too far apart, and nothing else. No color, no noise behind me. I turned down the fan in the cab and listened. Couldn't hear an engine or tires, just my own. I started getting a little nervous then. I flicked on the rear flood briefly, those big ones we use for night repair jobs. Lit up the road behind me for maybe 200 feet, and there was nothing there, just pavement and trees. I shut off the flood and the lights came back. Closer this time. Still no car, just those 2 white points floating. I didn't pull over again. I just kept driving, watching them come and go in the mirror. Sometimes they'd vanish completely for 5 or 10 minutes, then come back in exactly the same spot, same brightness. Always a perfect distance. Never weaving, never gaining. I told myself maybe it was a reflection, maybe something from my own lights bouncing off the back window. But then I remembered the rear window was covered with a vinyl work decal and mesh. No chance of reflection. And besides, the angles didn't make sense. These lights moved when I turned, and they held the curve behind me. At one point, James called in and asked if I was okay. He said I'd slowed down a lot and was veering slightly. I told him I was fine. Didn't want to sound paranoid, but I sped up a bit after that, just to see. The lights stayed with me. Eventually, we reached a little pull-off near a turnoff we sometimes use to flip direction. I pulled off again. This time, I shut the engine off. Hazard lights stayed on. I got out of the truck. Nothing behind me. The road was dead quiet. No breeze, no animals moving. Just that heavy silence you get in the middle of nowhere at night. I stood there for a good minute or two, trying to spot anything. Tail lights, engine sounds, even the crunch of gravel. But it was empty. I even walked a bit back up the road, maybe 50 feet. Still nothing. I got back in the truck, started it up, and when I checked the mirror again, the lights were back. Same spot. Like they'd just been waiting for me to get back in. That's when I started to get this weird feeling in my chest. Like pressure. Not pain, just this tightness, like the air was heavier. My ears felt like they do on a plane, right before they pop. I rolled down the window and stuck my head out, half expecting to hear something. Rotors, maybe, or some low thrum from a power line, but it was dead silent. I drove the rest of the way back to the staging lot without saying another word on the radio. The lights followed me until I hit the first real intersection with street lights. Soon as I turned off onto the main road, they were gone. I pulled into the gravel lot, shut everything down, and walked back to James's truck. He stepped out, lit a cigarette, and said, "You look like you saw a ghost." I just nodded. We checked the rear dash cam later that morning, the one that records the road behind the safety truck. Nothing on it. Just black road. No headlights, no flares, no reflections. Just me driving alone in the dark. But I know what I saw. It was just after 11 on a Saturday night in late August. I remember because school was starting that Monday, and I was squeezing in one last quiet weekend before everything got busy again. I was 16, staying at my dad's house out in the country. He lives about 10 minutes outside of town, middle of nowhere, surrounded by cornfields and old pine windbreaks. Nearest neighbor's probably a quarter-mile away. No streetlights. Great for stargazing. He'd gone to bed early, and I was out on the back deck with a blanket and my old pair of Nikon binoculars. Not a telescope or anything, just decent enough to get a better look at the sky. It was a clear night, no clouds at all, and the stars were bright. I was mostly lying there looking for satellites or meteors, just zoning out. It was quiet except for the occasional wind through the trees. No bugs chirping, which was odd now that I think about it. I didn't notice it right away, but there was just this kind of stillness. No crickets, no frogs, no owls, just silence and stars. I'd been scanning around Cygnus, then over to Cassiopeia. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just following patterns. Every few minutes I'd spot a plane blinking or a satellite cruising slowly in a straight line. Nothing weird. Then I saw this one light. Looked like any other star up near the summer triangle. It was just sitting there, not blinking or moving. I thought maybe it was Vega or Altair, but something felt off. It looked a little too white, not bluish like Vega usually looks. I held the binoculars on it for a while, and I started realizing it wasn't as sharp as the others, just barely fuzzy around the edges. Then it moved. Not fast at first. It drifted. Just a little. Like if you were holding your arm out with a laser pointer and your hand trembled slightly. I figured maybe I moved the binoculars without realizing it, so I braced my elbows on my knees and steadied them again. Found the spot. The light had moved. Not by much, just maybe a half star's width to the left. But the weird part was, it was now slightly out of alignment with the rest of the stars around it, like if you took one dot out of a perfect triangle and nudged it over. The shape was wrong. I kept staring at it. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then suddenly it shot straight up. I don't mean it drifted or curved, it just zipped directly upward, in one motion, like someone dragging it with a ruler. No arc, no buildup, no tail, just one blink and it was gone. I pulled the binoculars down and sat there frozen. I scanned the sky with my eyes, then looked through the binoculars again. I didn't see it anymore. No light, no fading trail, no sound. Nothing. I kept looking up, heart racing a little, trying to figure out what I just saw. Planes don't move like that. Satellites don't do that. And if it was a shooting star, it wouldn't go straight up. It would streak across or downward. This thing went against gravity. I sat there probably another 10 minutes, just watching. Nothing else moved. Same stars, same quiet. Then I started noticing something else. A low hum, not a noise exactly, more like a pressure. Like how you can tell a truck is coming down the road even before you hear it. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It was almost like it was coming from the air itself. It didn't last long, maybe a minute, then it was gone. I told myself it was just my ears playing tricks on me. Sometimes when it's that quiet, you start noticing weird little things, your own heartbeat, your breathing. Maybe I was just hyped up from seeing that light. But then I saw something else. Off to the west, near the tree line, another star-looking light started to rise. Slowly. Straight up, then paused. Then it blinked out. I didn't even have time to get the binoculars on it. I waited again. No sound. No breeze. Still no bugs. Just that same weird stillness. Eventually I got cold and went back inside. I didn't mention it to my dad. He would have just said I saw a satellite or a plane or something. The next day I looked up satellite paths and plane routes for that night. Nothing matched. No ISS, no known flyovers in that area at that time. I've watched the sky a lot before, and after that night, I've never seen anything do what that light did. We were cruising at 36,000 feet, somewhere over western Nebraska, maybe 100 miles east of Cheyenne. Clear skies, smooth ride. It was a night flight, Denver to Minneapolis, and I was on the second leg of a 4-day rotation. I've been flying commercial for about 12 years. Before that, I did some time with the Air National Guard, and even back then, night flights never bothered me. They're quiet, predictable. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I first noticed it. We were on autopilot. Everything's stable, no weather ahead, no traffic in our immediate vicinity. I was just sitting there sipping lukewarm coffee when something caught my eye through the left side of the cockpit window. At first I thought it was just a star, bright, low on the horizon, but then it moved. Not fast, just a smooth, steady glide from left to right. I leaned forward to get a better look, expecting to see a satellite or maybe another aircraft on a strange vector, but it didn't fit either. It was glowing, not with blinking nav lights or strobes like you'd see on a jet, just a soft, solid white light. The shape wasn't clear. It didn't have wings or any structure I could make out. It was just a sphere, I guess. Perfectly round from what I could tell. Not large, maybe the size of a car if I had to guess, though distance is tricky at night. I called it out to the FO, my first officer. He leaned over, spotted it immediately. We watched it in silence for maybe 30 seconds before I keyed the radio. I asked Center if they had any traffic in our area, even off our path. They said negative. No primary or secondary returns within a 100-mile radius. I told them we had visual contact with an unidentified light, 10 o'clock high, pacing west to east, holding steady speed. They asked for altitude. I said it was above us, maybe 500 feet, hard to judge exactly. They came back with nothing. No radar contact. They didn't sound concerned, just bored. I looked back out, and it was still there. Just moving along with us, maybe 2 or 3 miles out, matching our heading but slowly pulling ahead. There was no noise, obviously, everything's sealed up in the cockpit, but I kept having the weird sense that I should have been hearing something. Some kind of engine whine, or at least the Doppler shift of it moving past. The FO grabbed his phone to try and get a picture, but nothing showed up on the screen, not even a speck of light. He took a few anyway. Later we checked, just black sky. A few minutes in, it started to drift closer. Still smooth, still slow, just sort of sliding in until it was maybe a mile off our nose, slightly to port. I kept expecting it to make a turn or rise or dip or do something that would give away what it was, but it just stayed there, pacing us. Watching, I guess, if that makes sense. It felt like being watched. We debated diverting, not out of fear, but just in case it was a military thing or some kind of test drone. But there was no indication of anything like that. No NOTAMs, no restricted airspace in the area that night. After 10 minutes or so, it started doing these tiny adjustments. Little vertical wobbles, just a few feet up and down, then side to side. Not erratic. More like it was reacting to turbulence we weren't even feeling. Like it was testing something. The weirdest part was how quiet it all felt. Not in the literal sense, but like the air around us had gone still. The usual background chatter from ATC had died down. There weren't any other planes checking in or stepping on transmissions. Just us and this light. The FO leaned forward and said, "It's not showing up on TCAS either." I knew that already, but hearing it out loud made my stomach twist. If it was a drone, it should have squawked. If it was manned, we'd have picked it up. But nothing. No visual markers, no electronic signature, no reflection even. It was like it absorbed light, but not in a dramatic way. Just dull. After 15 minutes, maybe a little more, it started to drift downward. Not rapidly, just easing back, slipping under the horizon line. I figured it was banking off, maybe heading south. Then it dropped. Not like a dive. Not like anything aerodynamic. It just fell. Straight down like someone cut a string. 1 second it was level with us, the next it was gone. No arc, no acceleration curve, just gone. I called it in again, said we'd lost visual contact, requested any updates from nearby radar or military exercises. They had nothing. Said we might have seen a weather balloon. I didn't argue, I just logged the time and position. When we landed in Minneapolis, we filed a standard report. Nothing flashy, just unidentified light, visual contact, no deviation required. The FO asked a guy in ops if they'd had any radar pings around that time. He said no, shrugged, moved on. We checked the maintenance logs on the plane. Nothing abnormal. No glitches, no electrical interference, no autopilot deviations. Everything was clean. I don't know what we saw. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing chased us, or shined a beam, or buzzed the fuselage. It was just there, with us. Matching speed, holding position, and then disappearing like it had somewhere more important to be. Since then, I've had a few red eyes in the same general area. I catch myself scanning the dark off to the left more than usual. Never seen it again. But I still think about that moment when it dropped. How quiet it was. How final it felt. Like whatever it was had gotten what it came for and didn't need to stick around. I hunt mostly alone. Not because I'm antisocial or anything. I've got buddies who do it too, but I like the quiet. Just me, the trees, and the rhythm of the woods. I've got a piece of private land up near the Michigan-Wisconsin border, about 60 acres. Heavily wooded, pretty remote, no cell service past the gravel access road. I've been hunting that land for years. Back in October, I drove up for a long weekend. I wanted to get the trail cams checked and move a few of them before the rut started. I usually keep 6 out, spread over a wide loop that takes a couple hours to walk if I'm not in a rush. They're good cameras, mid-range models with infrared sound and motion triggers. Nothing fancy, but they've always been reliable. I got there late Friday afternoon. Sun was already dropping behind the trees, so I just unpacked, lit a fire, and set up in the little one-room cabin I built near the center of the property. No power, no plumbing, just a bed, a stove, and a shelf of gear. I'd planned to check the cams first thing in the morning. Saturday started normal, cold but clear. I made coffee on the stove and set off around 7:30. First camera was about a quarter-mile north of the cabin, near a game trail that cuts between 2 ridges. When I got there, the camera was hanging where I left it, but the power light was off. I opened the back, batteries were fine, but the switch was flipped off. That was weird. I never turn them off unless I'm swapping cards. I figured maybe I'd just forgotten. Flipped it back on, checked the card, nothing on it. Not even a test image from when I set it up. The second cam was dead too. Same thing, power switch off, empty card. By the time I got to the fourth one, I knew something was wrong. All of them were off. Batteries were still good, just powered down. No weather damage, no chew marks from animals. They hadn't been knocked over or anything. Just turned off, cards wiped. Except the 6th one. That one was further out, near a shallow ravine with a little creek at the bottom. It's the most isolated part of my property. I don't usually get much on that cam, mostly deer passing through or the occasional fox. But this time, it was still on. The light was blinking when I got there. I pulled the card and swapped in a fresh one. The batteries were half full. When I checked the images on the screen, there were only 2 shots from earlier in the week. Just branches swaying in the wind. But what caught my eye was the audio. I don't usually mess with the audio files unless I think something's off, but this one had one. Just one, from 3 nights earlier. I played it back on the little built-in speaker. It wasn't great quality, but I could hear these clicks. Soft, rhythmic, almost like someone gently tapping a stick against bark. Then there was a pause, and I heard breathing. Not an animal, not panting, just long, slow breaths. Close to the mic, right up on it, like something was standing directly in front of the lens but never triggered the motion sensor. I replayed it a couple times, standing there with my back to the trees. The breathing sounded almost human, too steady for a bear or coyote, but it was deep. Not like snoring, just slow inhales, slow exhales, like someone trying not to make noise, but not caring if they were heard. It made my stomach tighten up. I've spent a lot of time in those woods. I know what a person sounds like. I know what a deer or a raccoon or a bobcat sounds like. This wasn't any of those. I took the card back to the cabin and played it again on my laptop. With headphones, I caught more detail. There were faint shuffling noises, like feet on dry leaves. And underneath the breathing, I swear there was another sound. Hard to explain, like a low humming, but irregular. Almost like a machine trying to stay quiet. It faded in and out, not constant. And the clicks weren't random either. They came in a pattern. 3 clicks, pause, 2 clicks, long pause, then again. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't see anything on the images. No movement, no blur, nothing crossing the frame. Just the sounds. I went out again Sunday to double check the cams. Still all off, no prints, no marks, nothing out of place. I started to get this crawling feeling like I was being watched. I've had that before, usually when a bear's nearby or a big cat, but this felt different, not instinctual, just targeted. Sunday night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking I was hearing something outside. Not footsteps exactly, more like movement in the brush. The cabin doesn't have windows, just slats with shutters. I cracked one open a bit and sat there in the dark, listening. No wind, no rain, just dead quiet. Around 2 a.m., I heard the clicks again. 3, then 2, then silence. I didn't open the door. I don't know why. I wasn't scared exactly, but I didn't want to see anything. I just waited, gripping the edge of the cot, heart pounding. The clicks didn't come back. Nothing moved. Eventually, I must have dozed off. I left Monday morning. Didn't bother hunting. I packed up, locked the cabin, and drove the 3 hours back home without stopping. When I got back, I plugged the card into my desktop to get a cleaner listen to the audio. Same thing. Clicks, breathing, the low humming. But now that I could see the waveform, I noticed something else. The pattern wasn't random. The clicks were spaced evenly, almost like code. I don't know Morse, but it reminded me of it, deliberate. The breathing gets closer toward the end of the file. Not louder, closer, like whatever it was leaned in, right up to the mic. Then it just stops. No footsteps walking away, no sound at all, just cuts out. I showed the file to a friend of mine who works in forestry. He listened and said it sounded like a person with asthma. He laughed it off, said maybe some weird loner was messing with the cameras. But I know those woods, no one hikes out that far. No campsites nearby, no access roads. And none of the cams had any footage of anyone approaching or leaving. The next weekend, I drove back up with new cameras and moved the last one to a new spot closer to the cabin. I haven't picked up anything strange since, just deer and raccoons. I still have the audio, haven't shared it, haven't edited it, it's just sitting on my hard drive. I don't play it much anymore. I already know what it sounds like. The part that sticks with me is that the trail cams weren't damaged. They weren't stolen. Someone or something went to each one and turned them off, except for the last one, the one furthest out, the one that recorded whatever that was. I still hunt that land, but I don't go out at night anymore, and I always check the cameras before I sleep. We were maybe 6 miles in when the weather turned. The forecast said clear all weekend, but around 3 p.m., we saw clouds building fast over the ridge. Not just gray either, thick, dark ones that looked out of place for late summer in the Sierras. It was me and Mark. We've done that trail 3 times before, always a 2-nighter, looped through the Granite Basin and back out near the south entrance. This time we went light. Just day packs and a tarp in case we wanted to push through to the lake and back in one day. No tents. When the wind picked up, we were about halfway between the trailhead and the lake. That stretch runs narrow between 2 steep hillsides. Not a great place to be in a storm, but there were a couple dry creek beds where we figured we could hunker down if we needed to. We didn't start running until we saw the lightning. It wasn't close yet, but the thunder hit less than 10 seconds after, and the wind shifted. It carried this strange smell, like wet electronics or hot metal. Not ozone, something sharper. We slid down a rocky slope into a little gully, dropped the tarp over some low branches, and crouched underneath. It wasn't much shelter, but better than nothing. The rain started just as we pulled our packs under. Big, cold drops at first, then a wall of water. It got loud under there. Wind roaring through the trees above, rain hammering the tarp, thunder bouncing around the rocks. We didn't talk much, just sat with our heads down, waiting it out. I remember checking my watch at one point. It said 3:46. Mark looked at his 2 and nodded when I asked, "About 3:45?" He said, "Yeah." The storm didn't last long, 20, maybe 30 minutes tops. It blew through hard and fast, and then it was just dripping trees and distant thunder. We climbed out, shook off the tarp, and checked our packs. Everything was damp, but not soaked. We started back up the trail. There was this weird calm afterward. The birds didn't come back like they usually do, and the air felt heavy, like the pressure hadn't settled yet. I didn't think much of it at first. Just glad we didn't get hit by lightning. It was when we stopped for water that I noticed something was off. We were about 10 minutes up the trail from the gully, and I pulled out my bottle, sat on a boulder, and checked the time to see how far we were from the lake. My watch said 4:11. I looked over at Mark, who was crouched by the stream with his bottle, and said, "So what? About a mile to go?" He stood up, looked confused, and said, "It's almost 5." I laughed and said, "No, it's not," and held out my wrist. He held out his too, and we just stood there comparing them. His said 4:49. Mine still said 4:11. I tapped mine, thinking maybe it had stopped or glitched, but the second hand was moving. Everything looked normal. We figured maybe mine had reset somehow or got bumped when we ducked under the tarp. I asked him to check his phone, but we didn't have service and neither of us had downloaded an offline clock. My phone matched my watch, 4:13 by then. His phone showed 4:51. We kept walking, kind of joking about it, but I could tell it was bothering him too. We'd both been under the same tarp, never out of sight of each other. No way either of us could have wandered off or messed with the other's stuff. I tried not to let it get to me. We got to the lake around 5:15, his time. Mine said 4:37. Sun was still high, but the shadows looked longer than they should have. That's the part that stuck out to me, like the light didn't match my watch. We sat down to eat, and I noticed I felt off. Not sick, just weird. Heavy, like I hadn't slept, and I was starving. More than I should have been for a 4-hour hike. Mark didn't say anything, but he ate fast too. When I went to refill my water, I saw it again. My reflection in the lake looked, I don't know, washed out, paler than I remembered. The whites of my eyes looked pink. It could have been the glare, but it made me feel uneasy. We didn't stay long. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for August, even at elevation. We packed up and headed back before sunset. All the way back, I kept checking my watch. The time moved normally, second by second, minute by minute, but it never caught up to Mark's. By the time we reached the trailhead, his was still 38 minutes ahead of mine. We stood next to the car and compared again. His phone, his watch, and the car clock all matched. Mine and my phone were still behind. I held the reset button on my watch just to see if it would fix itself, but it didn't change anything. The only way to match his was to manually advance it. We didn't talk much on the drive, both tired. I figured I'd look it up later, maybe reset everything to GPS time. That night, I synced both my watch and phone to the internet. They corrected to match his, so whatever was happening stopped once we got out of the woods. But here's the part that kept bugging me. The timestamps on the photos I took. I use a little clip-on camera for quick shots on the trail. Takes pictures automatically every 5 minutes when it's on. I had it going from around noon to when we reached the lake. When I plugged it in the next morning, the images were there. Dozens of them. But something was wrong. From 3:46 to 4:49, my camera didn't take a single shot. Just skipped that whole window. It was on the whole time. Fully charged. It picked back up at 4:50 exactly. Mark had a GoPro strapped to his chest, set to record short clips when motion triggered. His videos kept rolling through the whole storm. You can hear the rain, see us under the tarp. He pulled it up on his laptop to show me. The video never cuts, just runs straight through until we climb out again. But I'm not in a few of the clips. There's about a 4-minute stretch where I'm just gone. The tarp's moving, like there's someone under it, but the shape isn't right, like there's too much space. You can hear me talk once or twice, but I'm not visible in the frame. Then I'm back, right next to him like I never moved. I don't remember leaving. He doesn't remember me leaving. And there's no point where we lost track of each other. I haven't told anyone else. Not family, not work friends. We still hike sometimes, but never on that trail again. I keep my phone's time set to automatic now, just in case. Still wear the same watch. Still works fine. But every once in a while I'll glance at it and it feels wrong, like it's catching up from something I didn't notice. I heard it first around midnight, this soft humming like a distant drone or maybe a machine running quietly, but not quite. It wasn't steady, more like it pulsed in and out, low enough that you had to really listen to catch it. I was lying in bed, the kind of night where everything outside is still and you notice sounds you usually don't. I I figured maybe it was a neighbor's generator or some construction far off, but this felt different. It wasn't loud or harsh, just kind of there. I got up and went to the window by my bed. The blinds were half closed, but I cracked them open a little to peek outside. My house is on the edge of a neighborhood, right where the trees start. You can see the dark outline of the tree line against the night sky, and beyond that, nothing but more trees. That's when I saw the lights. 3 of them, hovering just above the treetops, spaced out evenly. They were round, like big orbs, and glowed with this pale white light that had a slight blue tint. They weren't moving fast, almost just drifting there, but steady enough to be deliberate. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe it was some weird reflection or car lights off in the distance, but the position stayed the same. The humming seemed to get louder for a second, then faded. I watched for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it. The lights didn't blink or flash like aircraft or drones. They just glowed, almost softly like lanterns. I wanted to grab my phone, but I hesitated. My hand felt sticky, and there was this weird pressure in the back of my head, like when you're trying to remember a dream but can't quite reach it. The humming was almost hypnotic, making me feel lightheaded. I closed the blinds and sat down, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe some kind of weather balloon or those cheap drone light shows people do sometimes. I even joked to myself that I was losing it. But then it started again, the humming, louder this time, closer. I couldn't ignore it. I went back to the window and pulled the blinds up enough to see clearly. The 3 lights were still there, in the same spot, just above the tree line, no movement at all. I felt this sudden impulse to go outside and check it out. I know that sounds dumb. What could I really do? But it was like my body was moving on its own. I grabbed my phone and keys, threw on a jacket, and headed for the front door. The house was completely silent except for the humming, which I could now hear clearly on the porch. When I cracked open the door, it stopped instantly. The air outside felt cold and still, almost too still. I stepped out, scanning the sky where the lights had been. Nothing. No glow, no sign of anything at all. I looked around, but the street was empty, the trees dark and motionless. The humming didn't come back. I stayed out there for a while, just staring into the night, but the 3 lights were gone without a trace. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch with my phone in my lap. I kept listening, but all I could hear was the normal night sounds. Distant dogs, a car passing by, leaves rustling. The next morning, I checked outside again. No marks on the ground, no unusual sounds. Nothing to explain what I saw or heard. I haven't told anyone. Even writing this now, it feels strange to put it into words. I keep wondering if it was a trick of the mind, some weird optical illusion paired with a strange sound. But I know what I saw. Those 3 lights, just floating there in the dark, and the humming that stopped as soon as I opened the door. That's what happened. I don't have answers. I was driving home late one night, the kind of night where everything feels heavier, quieter, slower, like the world's holding its breath. It had been raining earlier, and by the time I left the restaurant where I'd been working a double shift, thick fog had rolled in. Not the kind where you can barely see the road ahead, but enough to blur the headlights and make everything look like it was underwater. I didn't think much of it, just put the car in gear and started down the old country road that cuts through a patch of farmland outside town. It's a familiar route for me. The road's narrow, 2 lanes with no shoulder, and bordered by fields and woods. There aren't many streetlights out there, so your headlights are the only things cutting through the dark. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Far ahead, headlights were coming toward me, bright and clear in the fog. At first, I relaxed a bit. Some other car, finally. But as the lights got closer, I realized something weird was happening. The car never passed. No matter how long I kept driving, those headlights just stayed on the other side of the road, coming closer, but never close enough to pass me. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was one of those weird optical illusions fog can create. But the headlights stayed there, locked in place on my side of the road. I tried to keep calm, but my heart started pounding. The headlights weren't moving around me like you'd expect if the car was driving by. It was like they were frozen in place, just creeping closer along the shoulder. I flicked on my high beams, hoping to get a better look, but the fog swallowed the light, and the headlights stayed stubbornly in front of me. I pulled over to the side, hands shaking a bit, and waited. The lights got closer, and I swear I caught the vague outline of a car, but every time I blinked or turned my head for a better look, it just faded back into the fog. When the lights were maybe 20 feet from me, I reached for my phone, hoping to call someone or at least flash my own lights, but my phone had no signal. Not surprising out there, but the timing was nerve-wracking. I sat there for a moment, watching the headlights inch closer. Then, out of nowhere, they stopped moving, just stayed there, bright and silent, like a pair of eyes watching me from the fog. I turned the engine off, thinking maybe if I stayed still, the car would pass or disappear. But the lights stayed. I didn't want to look away, but I also didn't want to stare at something I couldn't explain. Finally, I grabbed my keys and stepped out, fog swirling thick around me, damp on my face. I shined my flashlight toward the lights, but there was nothing. No car. No reflection. Just the 2 points of bright light, hovering in the fog, unmoving. That's when I noticed the tire tracks. They were fresh, running off the side of the road into the field next to me. Deep grooves in the wet dirt, leading away from the road, disappearing into the tall grass. They looked like someone had pulled off the road right there, but I couldn't see a car anywhere. I followed the tracks a few steps, but the fog was thick and the field soggy. My shoes got soaked, and I felt ridiculous standing there in the dark, staring into the empty field. When I turned back to the road, the headlights were gone. No flash of taillights, no engine noise, nothing. I got back in the car, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My hands were still shaking. I thought maybe I was tired, or the fog was messing with my eyes. I turned the engine on and drove slowly down the road, glancing in the mirrors, but there was nothing behind me. No headlights, no car, no sign anyone was out there at all. The tire tracks were still visible in the field when I passed, but no car, no footprints, no indication anyone had been there. The rest of the drive home was quiet. I kept my lights on high beam and checked the mirrors every few minutes, but nothing followed me. No lights, no cars, no sounds. When I pulled into my driveway, I still couldn't shake the feeling I'd been watched. I checked my phone for messages or calls. Nothing. No missed calls, no voicemails. I didn't tell anyone about it. It felt stupid, like something out of a bad movie. But sometimes when I drive that road at night, especially when the fog's thick, I swear I catch a glimpse of those headlights again, just at the edge of the trees, waiting, never quite moving, like they're stuck there, somewhere between here and nowhere. I was wrapping up my shift one night, sitting alone in a small control room tucked away on the edge of the forest preserve. The place was usually quiet except for the hum of the drone's engines and the faint buzz of the monitors. I operate these drones to do aerial surveys, mostly mapping, tracking wildlife, checking for illegal activity. Nothing flashy, just routine stuff. That night, the sky was clear, cold, and still. I launched the drone from the field next to the control room. It climbed smoothly, the camera feed showing dense treetops spreading out like a green carpet below. The job was to cover about 5 square miles, taking pictures and video in a grid pattern. I was watching the live feed, marking spots where the forest looked disturbed or unusual. About halfway through the flight, I noticed something on the monitor. It was a glint of light, just a small, reflective dot hovering above a cluster of trees near the center of the survey area. I thought maybe it was a balloon or a piece of trash caught in the branches, but it didn't move like that. It just hung there, perfectly still. I zoomed in, trying to get a better look. The object looked metallic, smooth and shiny, but it wasn't catching any reflection of the sun or moon. The sky was dark by then, but the thing had this odd, muted brightness that didn't quite fit. I scrubbed the video back and forth frame by frame, curious. The frame rate was 30 frames per second, and that object only showed up on one frame. The frame before it was gone. The frame after, gone again. I replayed it a few times, convinced I was missing something. Usually, if there's something real in the footage, You can see it for a few frames at least, or it moves across the screen. This just blinked in and out, like a glitch. But the weird part was that it cast no shadow on the trees beneath it. I checked every angle I could. No shadow, no reflection of light from the forest floor, nothing. I tried to zoom out and adjust the contrast and brightness on the software, thinking it might be some lens flare or a bug in the camera sensor. Nothing changed. The shape stayed perfectly clear on that one frame, then vanished completely on the next. I ran through the footage from earlier in the flight, and that exact spot in the forest never showed the object before or after. I was the only one in the control room, and I kept feeling like someone was watching me. It's a weird sensation when you're alone in a place that's supposed to be empty. I glanced out the window at the tree line beyond the building. The wind was still. The forest was silent except for the faint rustling of leaves. I decided to land the drone early and download the footage for a closer look on my personal laptop. The control room's monitors sometimes messed with the colors, and I wanted to run the video through some editing software. As I brought the drone back, I kept watching the feed, scanning for anything else out of place. Nothing showed up, just the usual dark canopy. Once the drone was on the ground, I grabbed the memory card and went to the break room. I fired up my laptop and transferred the files. I played back the video and paused on the frame with the mysterious object. It looked like a silver orb, about a foot across, hovering just above the tallest tree. The tree itself was maybe 50 feet tall, and the orb didn't seem to be caught on a branch or moving in the wind. I zoomed in again, trying to make out any details, but it was just smooth and featureless. The orb's edges were too sharp to be a glare or something on the lens, and the lighting was wrong for a reflection. I pulled up the timestamp for that frame, 2:13:47 a.m. It felt late for something like this to happen, but the forest is always active at night, even if you can't see much. Then I noticed something else. The drone's telemetry data showed the GPS signal spiked at that exact moment, with a weird glitch in the coordinates. Like the drone briefly jumped a few meters north, but the video feed stayed steady. It was subtle, just a few pixels shifting, but noticeable if you were looking for it. I played the clip over and over. The orb appears for a split second just before the glitch, then it's gone. The GPS jumps. Then everything returns to normal. I started feeling off, like the whole setup was malfunctioning. Maybe the drone had picked up some interference from a nearby radio tower or a power line, but there's nothing like that near the forest preserve. At least, none that should be causing this. I thought about calling the tech support line to see if anyone else had reported glitches like this, but I hesitated. It sounded crazy even to me, and I wasn't sure what to say. Hey, I saw a shiny orb in the forest that only showed up for one frame and made the GPS freak out. Not exactly something you toss around casually. I shut the laptop and went outside for some fresh air. The night was quiet and cold, just the way I like it. I looked up at the stars and the sky was clear again. No strange lights, no noises, just the normal sounds of the forest at night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, watching, or maybe waiting. The next day, I reviewed more footage from previous nights, trying to find any other weird spots. Nothing. The drone flew the same routes every night, but this orb appeared nowhere else. Just that one frame, one place, one time. I showed the clip to my supervisor. He watched it quietly, then said it looked like a camera glitch or maybe a bug on the lens. That made sense, but it didn't explain the GPS glitch or the perfect circle where the orb hovered. I asked if we could send another drone up to that exact spot for a closer look, but he said it wasn't a priority. A few nights later, I volunteered to run another flight during a late shift. I wanted to see if I could catch anything similar. This time, I kept the drone hovering longer over the same area. The feed was normal, just trees, shadows, and nothing unusual. But halfway through the hover, the drone's controls got sluggish, like the signal was lagging. I tried to adjust the antenna, but the feed kept pixelating for a few seconds. Then the drone tilted slightly, as if pushed by an invisible force. I moved it away from the spot. The controls snapped back to normal. I landed the drone and checked the logs. No hardware errors, no interference reported. It was like the drone had passed through some invisible zone that messed with its systems briefly. I didn't mention this to anyone. After that, I started feeling uneasy whenever I worked late at night. Not because of anything I saw, but because I kept imagining that orb from the footage blinking in and out, just out of reach. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the control room and the monitors are dark, I catch myself glancing at the patch of forest beyond the windows, wondering if that shape is still out there, hovering silently, watching. I don't know what it was or why it showed up for just a moment. The footage is the only proof I have, but even that feels like it'd be a trick or a mistake. Whatever it was, it didn't want to be found. Or maybe it didn't want me to find it at all. I woke up standing in my backyard, barefoot on the cold grass, staring up at the sky. The first thing I noticed was a ringing in my ears, like when you've been at a concert or your headphones blast too loud. It wasn't loud, just this steady, high-pitched tone that seemed to fill my head. I blinked a few times, trying to get my bearings, but everything felt foggy, like I'd just been pulled out of a deep sleep. I didn't remember going outside. The last thing I could recall was being in bed, probably around midnight. I wasn't even fully sure what time it was now. The sky was dark, but there was this strange, muted glow overhead, like the whole neighborhood was under a thick haze. I looked down at my feet. They were wet and a little muddy, and the grass was damp with dew. I live in a suburban neighborhood, so it's not like I have a forest or anything out back, just a small patch of grass and a wooden fence. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain, even though the forecast didn't call for any. I had no idea how I'd gotten out here. I checked my hands and clothes for cuts or scratches, thinking maybe I'd fallen or something, but there was nothing. My shirt was wrinkled and untucked, and my jeans had some dirt smudges, but no real damage. I didn't feel hurt or out of breath, just kind of blank. The ringing didn't stop. It was still there, this constant high tone inside my head, and I noticed my heartbeat was a little louder than normal. I stepped toward the back door, and the cold grass squished under my feet. Every step felt strange, like I was moving through a dream. I opened the door and stepped inside. The ringing started to fade the moment I crossed the threshold. It wasn't instant, but slow, like a volume knob turning down. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a second, trying to shake off the weird feeling. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were steady but felt strange, like they didn't quite belong to me. I tried to remember what happened before I ended up outside, but my mind was blank, like a blank screen. I checked my phone for the time. It was 2:37 a.m. I had no messages, no missed calls. The screen was dim, but I noticed something odd. The battery had dropped from around 60% when I went to bed to just 12% now. I was pretty sure I hadn't used it at all during the night. I sat down at the kitchen table and tried to focus. The ringing was gone, but I felt a lingering pressure behind my eyes. I thought about trying to go back to bed, but part of me was restless, like I needed to figure out what had just happened. I decided to check the backyard again, but this time with shoes and a flashlight. I wanted to see if there was anything out there that could explain the ringing or how I got out. Outside, the grass looked normal, except for a small circle near the fence where the dew was missing. The ground was dry there, even though the rest of the lawn was wet. It wasn't muddy or crushed, just dry and oddly clean, like someone had wiped it down. I scanned the sky with my flashlight, but there was nothing except a thick layer of fog or haze that blurred the streetlights in the distance. No stars, no moon. That's when I noticed it, a faint glow beyond the fence line off in the woods behind the houses. It was pale and steady, not like a flashlight or a car. Just this soft, unmoving light that didn't flicker or change. I thought maybe it was a street lamp or a neighbor's porch light, but it felt too far away and too low to be any of those. And I knew every house around here pretty well. The ringing came back for a moment, just a faint buzz, but it stopped again as soon as I turned my head away from the light. I stood there for a few minutes, watching it, feeling this weird mix of calm and unease. I wanted to call someone, but I wasn't sure what I'd say. Eventually, I went back inside. The moment I stepped through the door, the light outside blinked off, disappearing as quietly as it had come. The next day, I asked my neighbor if they had seen anything weird last night, but they said no. Everything was normal. The yard looked fine, and nothing unusual was reported. I checked the backyard again during daylight. That dry patch was still there. It looked like a perfect circle, maybe 10 feet across, with the grass stiff and pale. I've sleptwalked a few times before, but never anything like this. Never out into the backyard in the middle of the night, with no memory of moving, and definitely never with ringing in my ears or strange lights hovering just beyond the fence. I haven't told many people about it, mostly because I don't really understand what happened. It wasn't scary like a nightmare, but it wasn't normal either. Sometimes when it's quiet and I'm lying in bed, I can still hear that faint ringing for a moment, like a reminder that whatever was out there is still just beyond my reach. I was working the overnight shift as a security guard at a small industrial park on the outskirts of town. The place wasn't much, just a few warehouses, a loading dock, and some empty fields around the perimeter. My job was mostly watching the cameras and making rounds every couple of hours, checking doors and the fence line. Nothing exciting ever happened, which was probably the point. It was a little past 2 a.m. when I noticed something on one of the cameras covering the field behind the north fence. The screen showed the usual empty grass, but then a dark shape appeared, hovering just above the ground. At first, I thought it was some kind of shadow or a trick of the light. The shape was triangular, but not sharp or mechanical looking, kind of soft-edged and smooth, like it was made of shadow itself. It hung there silently for a few seconds, then slowly lowered until it seemed to settle on the grass. The cameras have night vision, so the field looked washed out in greenish tones, but the shape stayed black, absorbing the light. I zoomed in, but the image stayed grainy, nothing like a solid object with details. I grabbed my radio to call dispatch, thinking maybe someone was testing a drone or something. Nothing. I clicked the button, talked, and waited for a reply, but the static was the only thing I got. Weird, but sometimes the radios mess up out here. After a minute, I put down the radio and grabbed my flashlight. I decided to check it out for myself. I stepped out of the security building, and as soon as I did, the radio clicked on and crackled alive with background noise again. I tried talking into it, and it worked fine. I made my way across the gravel lot toward the field. The air was cold and smelled like damp earth. When I got to the edge of the grass, I saw the spot where the shape had landed. There was no shape anymore, no footprints, no tire tracks, just a patch of dead grass, maybe 15 feet across, perfectly circular. The rest of the field was green and alive, but this spot was yellowed and brittle, like it had been scorched or starved of water. I knelt down and touched the grass. It felt dry, almost crunchy. There wasn't any heat coming from it or anything else strange that I could notice. Curious, I reached for my radio again and pressed the button. Nothing. Dead silence. No static, no background noise, just quiet. I pressed the button a few more times. Still nothing. It wasn't broken. I knew the battery was fine. Then I stepped back just outside the circle, and the radio crackled back to life. That's when a cold feeling crept over me. I stayed near the edge of the circle, talking into the radio, trying to explain what I saw, but the voice on the other end kept cutting out, and the signal was weak. I went back inside the building, thinking maybe I should call the supervisor or the cops just to have someone check it out. But the moment I closed the door behind me, the radio went silent again. No static, no crackle, nothing. I sat down at the monitor and watched the field camera. The shape was gone, but I kept my eyes glued to the screen. The dead grass circle was still there, staring back at me like a stain. About 15 minutes later, the shape appeared again, same spot, hovering just above the grass, I swear. It didn't move or make a sound. I got up and grabbed my flashlight, but this time I hesitated before stepping outside. I stood in the doorway for a moment, flashlight in hand, the radio dead and useless in my pocket. The fog had rolled in a little, thickening the air and making the whole field look like a blurred photo. I finally stepped out, and as soon as my foot crossed the threshold of the dead grass circle, the radio switched back on with static. I pressed the button and tried to talk. Static. Then a voice, barely audible, came through. Someone saying, "What's your status?" But the words were slurred, like the transmission was breaking up. I called back, but the response was gone. The radio died again the moment I stepped back out of the circle. I felt trapped. The radio only worked inside the circle or just outside it, but never both places at the same time. It was like an invisible boundary that cut off all communication. I didn't want to stay standing there for long, so I stepped away and watched the camera feed. The shape didn't move for several minutes, then slowly lifted up, dissolving into the fog like it had never been there. After that, the circle of dead grass stayed where it was. I checked it every shift for weeks, but the shape never returned. The radio kept acting weird near the spot, cutting in and out without reason. Nothing else ever showed up on the cameras, and no one else seemed to notice anything. I told a couple of coworkers about it, but they laughed it off. Said I must have been seeing things, or maybe a trick with the camera. I don't know what I saw. It wasn't a drone or any kind of plane I recognize. No sound, no heat, no details. Just a silent, dark shape and a patch of dead grass where it landed. And that radio. The way it cut out every time I was on the grass made me feel like whatever that thing was, it didn't want me to call for help. I kept working that job for a while longer, but I never went near that circle again. The whole thing still feels off, like something was watching me through the camera feed, waiting for me to step out there, but never wanting to be seen. I don't have answers. Just a patch of dead grass, a broken radio, and a dark shape that vanished without a trace. I was driving home from work one night, about 11:30 p.m. The roads were quiet, just a few cars here and there. I usually keep my phone on silent while I'm driving, but when I pulled into the driveway and grabbed my phone, I saw I had a new voicemail. I didn't recognize the number, but my voicemail list showed it was from my own number. That's when things started to feel weird. I hit play, and it was me. My voice, panicked and confused, talking about a light that won't let me move. I don't remember leaving that message at all. And the weirdest part? There was no call in my recent calls list. No outgoing or incoming call logged, just the voicemail. I sat there on my couch listening again, and it was definitely me, same voice, same tone, but I had zero memory of it. The message started with me saying, "I don't know what this is. It's just a light. It's right there and I can't move. It won't let me move. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." The way I said it, you could hear how rattled I was. Then it cut out. That was it. I kept replaying it, trying to remember if I'd been messing with my phone or if maybe I'd recorded it accidentally. But nothing clicked. I don't talk in my sleep, and I never make calls or messages without meaning to. Plus, like I said, no call records anywhere. The night before, I remembered I had gone out for a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. It was late, maybe 10 p.m. or so, and the streetlights were dim and sparse. I don't usually do that, but I wanted some fresh air. I never take my phone on those walks, usually leave it inside. But something about that night felt off. When I got to the corner by the park, I noticed this faint glow way off in the distance, near the tree line. It wasn't like any light I'd seen before. It wasn't a street lamp, and there were no cars or houses with their lights on there. The glow was pale and steady, almost bluish white. It didn't flicker or move, just hung there about the height of a tree. I figured it might be some kind of flashlight or someone's phone light, but I couldn't see anyone around. The park was empty. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, but the light seemed to follow me. Not by moving closer or anything obvious, but if I stopped and looked, it was always in roughly the same spot relative to me. I felt my skin crawl, like I was being watched, but there was no one there. No footsteps, no sounds, nothing. Just that light. I hurried back home, doors locked behind me. I told myself it was just some guy messing with a drone or some other prank, but it didn't feel right. That was the last thing I remembered clearly until I heard that voicemail. After hearing the message, I went through my phone settings and checked the audio logs, permissions, anything that might explain how the recording happened, but everything looked normal. No apps were active that could have done it, and I had no reason to record myself like that. I also thought maybe someone hacked my phone and left the message, but that made less sense the more I thought about it. Why record a panicked message in my own voice if they could just call or text me? The next day, I kept thinking about the light and the voicemail. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see that same glow in the distance. At work, I was distracted, almost convinced people were watching me or that something was lurking just out of sight. I kept checking my phone for more strange messages or calls, but nothing. I told a close friend about the voicemail, played it for him, and he looked as confused as I felt. He said maybe it was some kind of glitch or a virus, but nothing like that had ever happened to me before. I tried to put it behind me, but over the next few days, little things kept piling up. Lights in my house flickered randomly, the TV would turn on by itself for a second, and I could swear I heard a faint humming noise outside my window late at night. I checked outside every time but never saw anything. One night, I decided to record my own voice, talking about the experience, trying to make sense of it all. When I played it back, the recording had a faint background noise I didn't notice while recording. A low, steady hum, almost like a vibration. It reminded me of the weird light from the park, the one that wouldn't let me move. I went back to the park to see if I could find the light again, but the spot was dark and quiet. No glow, no hum, nothing. Just the usual streetlights and the rustling of trees. I don't know what happened that night or how that voicemail got on my phone. All I know is I heard myself say things I don't remember feeling about something I don't remember seeing. And that light, it's like it left a mark on me, even if I can't explain it. Since then, I keep my phone close and try not to walk alone at night. The voicemail's still there. Sometimes I play it just to remind myself that what happened wasn't all in my head, but I'm not sure I want to hear it too often. I was out on the lake just before midnight, sitting alone in my little aluminum boat, fishing like I usually do on slow summer nights. It's the kind of spot where everything feels calm. The water's still, the air is cool but not cold, and the only sounds are crickets and frogs, the occasional splash if a fish jumps. I've been coming here for years, so it's pretty familiar, almost boring in a way. But that night, something was different. I'd been fishing for a couple hours, not much action, just letting the quiet soak in. The moon was out, not full, but bright enough to see the shapes of the trees along the shore. I had my headlamp off to avoid scaring the fish, and I was just sitting there, rod in hand, when I noticed the frogs. They were noisy like usual all around the lake, their croaking filling the air in waves. That's normal, especially at night in the summer. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Just like that. 1 second, frogs everywhere. The next, complete silence. It was the kind of silence that's too deep. No frogs, no bugs, no wind. Just me and the quiet water. I looked around, half expecting a rainstorm or wind or something to kick up, but the lake was flat, smooth like glass. The night didn't feel colder or warmer or heavier, it just felt empty. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a pale, blurry line moving beneath the surface, like something under the water shining faintly. It wasn't a reflection or moonlight glinting off ripples. The water was still. This thing moved in a straight line, steady and slow, maybe a foot below the surface, cutting across the lake from the far shore straight toward me. I watched it cut through the water with no splash, no waves, no bubbles, nothing that would normally come from a fish or a boat. It was smooth, like it was sliding through some kind of liquid light, but it wasn't bright or flashing or weird colors. Just a soft, pale glow, almost like it was glowing from inside. I fumbled with my flashlight but didn't turn it on. I didn't want to lose sight of it or scare it off. It felt like if I made a sudden move, it'd disappear. The line moved slowly, straight toward me, and when it got about 10 feet from the boat, I swear I saw it change shape a little, almost like it was flattening or spreading out sideways. But it never broke the surface. I sat frozen, heart pounding, trying to think what it could be. A fish? No way. There's nothing that big in that lake, and none of the fish glow. Maybe someone with a flashlight or some underwater gear, but I hadn't heard a boat or motor. Plus, who would be out here in the middle of the night with lights under the water, and why stay so far from shore? The line passed under the boat and kept going on the other side, disappearing near the shore opposite me, where there's thick trees and reeds. I waited a few minutes, but nothing else happened. The frogs stayed silent. The bugs didn't start chirping again. The stillness lingered like it was stretched out. I finally shook myself, flicked on my headlamp, and scanned the shoreline. Nothing unusual. No boats, no flashlights, no movement. Just trees and dark water. I fished a little longer, but the silence never broke. I didn't hear another croak or splash for maybe 20 minutes. Eventually, the frogs started up again, slow at first, then building back to the usual chorus. The night felt normal again. I don't know how long I sat there after that, but I felt uneasy. The light, the silence, something wasn't right. I packed up, rowed back to shore slowly, my mind racing. When I got home, I checked the boat and the gear. Nothing out of place. No scratches or dents. No strange residue. The weirdest part is I've been back to that lake plenty of times since at the same hour, but I've never seen or heard anything like that again. No silent frogs, no glowing line beneath the water. It feels like that night was some kind of glitch in reality. Or maybe I saw something no one else has. Whatever it wasn't a fish or a boat or any animal I know. I don't know what to make of it, but it stuck with me. The way everything just went quiet, like the whole lake was holding its breath. And that light, moving so smooth and silent under the water, like it was something that didn't belong. I snuck out around 11:45. My mom had gone to bed a little after 10, and my stepdad was passed out in the recliner with the TV still on. I waited until I was sure they weren't going to move again, then slipped out the back door. I didn't even have to be that careful. The floor in our place creaks like crazy, but once they're out, they're out. My plan was simple. Meet up with a few people from school at the usual spot, the old batting cages behind the gas station. It wasn't far, just a 15-minute walk down the back trails, so I didn't bother grabbing anything except my phone and a hoodie. It was a little chilly out, but clear, stars out, and no wind. I was in sneakers, jeans, nothing heavy. The trail cuts behind the water treatment plant, then runs alongside the creek for a while before hitting the fence by the ball fields. It's not lit or anything, but I've walked it a dozen times. I had my phone flashlight on, just pointed at my feet. I made it to the cages around midnight. There were 3 people already there, Jamie, Lex, and a guy named Chris, who I didn't know super well. Someone had a speaker playing music low. We sat around on the broken benches and passed a vape, just talking about nothing. Nobody was drinking or doing anything crazy, just hanging out, killing time. I remember checking my phone at 12:17. I know that because I thought it was funny how specific the time was when I checked. I wasn't in any rush to get home, but I figured I'd dip out by 1. That was kind of my unspoken curfew when I snuck out. If I got back by 1:15 or so, no one noticed. It's what happened on the way back that I can't explain. I said goodbye to the group a little before 12:40. Jamie said something like, "Text when you get in," and I nodded, but I never did. I remember heading back down the trail with my phone still out, light on low. No weird vibes, no one following me. Just quiet and dark like it always is. But somewhere along the trail, I stopped noticing where I was. It didn't feel like I blacked out or anything. I don't think I ever stopped walking. It just felt like I blinked, and I was suddenly aware I wasn't where I thought I should be. The trail looked wrong. Too narrow, maybe. The trees on either side seemed taller, closer together. I stopped walking and turned in a slow circle with my flashlight, trying to figure out how far I'd gone. My heart started racing a little, but I told myself it was just the dark playing tricks. I was probably just off by a few feet, took a wrong turn onto one of the side deer paths. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. I mean, really quiet. No bugs, no leaves rustling, nothing. Even the sound of the creek, which I should have been close to, was gone. It was like being in a soundproof room outside. I could hear my own breathing louder than usual. I looked at my phone again to check the time and realized the screen was black. Dead. I hadn't used it much, so it should have still had at least 60% left. I tried holding the power button, nothing. Tapped the screen, nothing. No vibration, no flicker, just dead. I was standing there in the middle of the trail holding this useless phone when I felt something shift. Not saw, not heard, just felt. Like the air around me had moved, but there was no wind, like a pressure change. My ears didn't pop, but it had that kind of vibe, like when you drive through elevation fast. I turned off the flashlight and just stood there for a second, trying to listen. And that's when I saw a flash of light. Not bright, not sudden. It was soft and slow, like a camera flash that didn't quite go off all the way. It came from ahead of me, just barely through the trees, and then disappeared. It didn't light anything up, it just was there for a second, then gone. I waited a bit, didn't move. The air still felt weird, thick maybe. Not warm, not cold, just like I was standing in something, not just air. I started walking again, slowly, not totally sure I was going the right way. I don't know how long I walked after that. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been an hour. Time felt wrong. My legs started to hurt a little and my feet were squishing in my shoes. That's when I noticed they were wet. Soaking, actually. I stopped and crouched to touch my jeans. They were wet, halfway up my calves. I ran my hand along the cuff and my fingers came back cold. But the trail hadn't been wet. It hadn't rained. There weren't any puddles. I hadn't crossed the creek. I looked around again and started to feel real off. Not dizzy exactly, more like when you wake up too fast and your stomach drops for a second. I felt like I'd wandered too far into something I wasn't supposed to find. Not in a bad guy in the woods way. More like whatever was around didn't care I was there, but I wasn't meant to be part of it. Then I heard this noise. It wasn't loud. It sounded far off, like a rumble or a generator, but it had a rhythm to it. Not a machine rhythm either, more like breathing, slow, steady, and deep. It came from the same direction I'd seen the light earlier. I didn't go toward it. I don't think I could have made myself if I wanted to. I turned and just walked. Not fast, but steady. I didn't look behind me. I kept my eyes on the ground and just walked. Eventually, the trees started looking familiar again, more spaced out. I recognized a log I jumped over on the way in, and after another few minutes, I saw the water plant's fence. When I finally got to the edge of the neighborhood, the streetlights looked way too bright. I felt like I'd been underground or something. I cut through a couple backyards and made it home without seeing anyone. I didn't even take my shoes off. I went straight to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. The clock on my nightstand said 2:41 a.m. I stared at it for a while. I didn't believe it. There was no way I'd been gone that long. I left the cages around 12:40. The walk back should have taken 15 minutes, 20 max if I was dragging. I plugged in my phone, and it took forever to turn on. When it finally booted, it said the battery was completely drained. No messages, no calls. Nothing between 12:17 and 2:43. My shoes were still soaked. I took them off and dumped water into the trash can. Not a little damp, full-on puddles in the soles. The cuffs of my jeans had this dark grit on them, like sand or really fine gravel. I sniffed the inside of one shoe and it didn't smell like creek water, just off, like old metal or something. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was scared, I didn't feel scared, not exactly. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something had watched me, not followed. Watched, like I'd wandered through something's space and it had paused, just long enough to notice. The next day I walked the trail again during daylight. The creek was low and dry on both sides of the bridge. No mud, no water. The trail was fine, nothing unusual. I checked my route against a map. There weren't any forks or turns I could have missed. No side trails that loop around. It was like I walked home in a straight line, but took 2 hours to do it. It was a Sunday afternoon in late August, around 6. Hot, not a cloud in the sky. I was flying my drone in the field behind the old quarry, which I'd done a bunch of times before. The spot's kind of perfect. Big open space, no people, no power lines or trees to get in the way. It's technically private land, but no one's used it in years. There's a crumbling gate and some rusted out machinery off to the side, but it's mostly just tall grass and gravel now. I'd been out there for maybe an hour, just getting wide tracking shots and playing with low altitude maneuvers. I'm not a pro or anything, just a guy with a DJI drone and too much free time. I like to fly slow and low and then speed it up in post, so most of what I shoot is pretty basic. At some point, I switched the drone to follow mode and jogged a loop around the field, letting it track me from behind. Everything was normal. After that, I brought it up high, like 300 feet, and just let it hover while I scrolled through some of the shots on the controller. I wasn't looking at the live feed for a minute or two. I remember wiping sweat off my forehead and glancing up at the drone, just this tiny white dot against the blue sky, totally still. Then something flickered on the screen. Not a glitch, not a freeze, just a flash of movement. I tapped to center the camera and saw something dart across the frame from right to left. It was small, but clear. Not a bird, not an insect on the lens. This thing moved too straight and too fast, like it knew exactly where it was going. I thought maybe it was another drone, but I'd have heard it. I spun the camera and tried to follow, but there was nothing for a few seconds. Then it came back. Same object, this time from the opposite direction, but it didn't turn. It just reversed. Like it hit an invisible wall and shot back the way it came, same speed, no curve or arc. It wasn't banking or tilting like a drone would. It was dead straight. I tapped to track it manually and managed to lock on for maybe 2 seconds. The feed zoomed and centered, and I could see it better. Dull gray, no lights, no rotors, no wings. Just a short cylinder, kind of like a thermos. Then it stopped. Midair. No deceleration, it just froze in place. I stared at the feed, not moving, waiting for it to drop or drift or something. It didn't. It hovered for maybe 3 seconds, still no sound, and then shot straight up. I mean, up. Not at an angle. Directly vertical, like someone dragged it out of the sky with a fishing line. Gone in a second. Into nothing. I looked up physically to see if I could spot it with my eyes, but there was nothing. Just empty sky. I remember looking back at the controller and rewinding the footage, scrubbing through frame by frame. I thought maybe I'd imagined it or it was a glitch in the app, but the footage was clean. You could see it enter, pause, reverse, stop, and vanish. All smooth, no stutter. Then the drone started drifting. Not much, just a foot or two, but it wasn't responding right. I nudged the controls and got nothing for a second, then it jolted sideways. I pulled back to descend and it hesitated again before finally dropping. The lag was bad, like I was losing signal, but the controller said connection was strong. When it got to about 80 feet, it started spinning slowly. I didn't touch the yaw stick, it just started rotating on its own. Not fast, but steady. I tried to correct, and nothing happened. I held the joystick down to land it, and it slowed, then stopped descending completely at maybe 60 feet. Then the screen went black. Not the whole controller, just the video feed. Battery was still good, GPS lock was still green, but the camera feed was gone. I could still hear the drone buzzing overhead, but I couldn't see anything. I waited a second, hoping it would come back. Then I heard something else, not from the drone, on the ground. It sounded like a single step on gravel, maybe 20 feet behind me, just one. I turned fast, but there was nothing, just the field, flat and empty. The grass wasn't even moving, no wind. I looked back up, and the drone was still hovering, not spinning anymore, but still stuck. I tried switching to sport mode to force it down faster. Nothing. Still no video feed. Another sound behind me. Same spot. One step. Crunch. I turned again, slower this time, scanning the ground. Still no one. I was alone. I'd parked on the other side of the quarry, maybe a 5-minute walk. No one else's car was there when I came in. I hadn't heard anything the whole time I'd been out. Then I noticed the sound had stopped. Not just the footsteps. Everything. No wind, no birds, no bugs. It was like someone had muted the whole field. I don't know how else to explain it. I could hear the blood in my ears, but nothing else. I looked up again and the drone was descending. Slowly at first, then normal speed. The video feed came back halfway down, fuzzy at first and then clear. It touched down right where it had launched and just sat there. No spinning, no weird movement. I didn't pack up right away. I just stood there with the controller in my hands, listening. The silence held for a few more seconds, then the breeze kicked up again. I heard a crow in the distance. Just like that, everything went back to normal. I turned the drone off and packed it into my case, then walked back to the car a little faster than usual. I didn't play any music on the drive home. I just kept replaying the footage in my head, trying to make sense of it. When I got back, I dumped the files onto my laptop. The footage was all there. The object showed up exactly like I remembered. Fast, smooth, sharp turns with no angle. The vertical shot was the clearest part. It literally went from dead stop to gone in under a second. Frame by frame, it just vanished into the blue. No trail, no distortion, no shadow. Just gone. I checked the telemetry data too. The drone had no errors logged during the spin or the signal loss. Battery voltage stayed normal. Compass didn't spike. It all looked clean. I've gone back to that field since a few times, actually. Never seen anything like that again. Every time I fly now, I keep one eye on the sky and one on the live feed. But it's all been normal. Nothing weird, nothing I couldn't explain. Except for that one day. I was 16 when this happened, and I was obsessed with drones. I saved up for months doing lawn work to get a decent one. Nothing military grade or anything, just a DJI with a decent camera and thermal mode. I flew it almost every day after school, especially on weekends. I live in a rural area, mostly farmland, so there's a lot of open space to mess around in. I'd go out behind our property and fly it over the fields, woods, and the old irrigation canals that barely run anymore. This was in early fall, right after harvest, so the corn was all cut down and the fields looked bare. Kind of eerie when everything's just flat and brown and quiet. I remember the air felt thick that day, like it wanted to rain but never quite got there. Cloud cover was low, but solid. No sun peeking through. I went out around 5 p.m. It gets darker faster that time of year, but I still had enough light. I launched the drone from behind the barn and flew it west over Mr. Collins' property. He was fine with it. He actually liked watching the footage sometimes. His land stretches for a few miles, mostly soybean fields and some cattle farther out. No houses back there, just fence lines and those thin dirt access roads. Everything started normal. I did a few wide sweeps, got some shots of the tree lines, checked out an old windmill. Then I kicked it into thermal for fun. I liked looking for deer or coyotes in the brush. Usually you'd see little white smudges running through the fields, but it was dead quiet. No animals, no movement. That's not super rare during certain parts of the day, but it felt strange. I remember thinking it was like the whole area had emptied out. I was flying at about 400 feet when I saw something move near the top edge of the thermal feed. Just a blur at first. I switched back to regular video to try and spot it, but I couldn't see anything, just gray clouds. Then it passed through the frame again, this time clearer. It wasn't a bird, not the way it moved. It was too fast, too smooth. The shape was weird too. Narrow at the front and rounder at the back, like a teardrop or a water droplet flipped on its side. No wings, no tail. It moved perfectly horizontal, just under the cloud layer, fast but not jerky. It didn't make any sound. That was the first thing I noticed when I took off the headset and listened. Nothing. Usually, even high-flying jets have a distant roar. This thing was close enough that it should have made some kind of noise, but it was totally silent. I tried to follow it with the drone, but it was moving too fast. I adjusted the altitude and pointed the camera up more. On the screen I saw it again, just for maybe 3 seconds. Same shape, same movement. It didn't wobble or spin. It was like it was locked into some invisible rail under the clouds. I switched back to thermal. Nothing. I mean, nothing. It should have shown up. Planes and even birds give off heat. But the screen was empty. Even when I scrubbed back the footage later, there was no heat trail, no change in temperature. Like it wasn't there at all. I hovered for a while, scanning the sky. My heart was beating fast, and I was trying to tell myself it was probably a drone or some government test, something explainable, but it didn't feel right. The way it moved wasn't like anything I'd ever seen, and I'd watched hours of drone videos, military flight tests, all that. Then the drone glitched. The screen froze for about 2 seconds, then cut to static. I thought I lost connection, but the controller still said I had full bars. The feed came back, but the colors were off, washed out, almost like an old VHS. I started bringing it back manually. As it returned, I noticed the wind picking up. It had been still earlier, but now it was rustling through the grass and pushing the tops of the trees. Not a storm wind, just enough to be strange. When the drone got back over my property, I heard it again and looked up. Still no sound, but I saw that shape, barely, cutting across the sky from south to north. It was almost camouflaged. Not invisible, but blending in, like how heat waves ripple in the air. If I hadn't been looking right at it, I might have missed it. I landed the drone fast, got it shut down, then just stood there staring at the sky. My dog came around the side of the barn, barking like crazy. He's old and doesn't usually bark unless someone's at the door or a car pulls up. He didn't look up, just paced in circles and barked nonstop. The sky stayed quiet after that. Nothing else passed over and the wind settled down. Later that night, I went through the footage frame by frame. You could barely see it, just this blur moving way too smooth, too fast, and too low for any kind of normal aircraft. No sound, no lights, no heat. I showed it to my uncle the next weekend. He's a retired Air Force mechanic, and he watched the clip maybe 10 times and just said, "Huh, I never posted it anywhere. I deleted it a few weeks later. I don't know why." It just felt wrong to keep, like it wasn't meant to be recorded. I still fly the drone sometimes, but I don't fly it out over the farms anymore. Just around the yard, just where I can see it. We weren't planning to stop. It just sort of happened. We were driving back from visiting her parents out in Boone. It was late, close to midnight, and we were coming down that long stretch of 221 before it curves south past the ridges. It's quiet up there at night. No houses, barely any lights, just empty roads and forest. You can usually see stars real clear once you get up high enough. She saw the turnout first, just a gravel patch off the road with a guardrail, one of those overlooks people pull into during the day to take photos. She asked if we could stop for a few minutes, stretch our legs. I wasn't in a hurry, so I pulled in. I cut the engine but left the battery on so we could still have the heater going. It was cold for April. Not freezing, but that kind of mountain chill that sticks in your jacket. We got out and leaned against the hood. The view was pretty good. No clouds, barely a breeze, sky full of stars. We didn't say much at first, just stood there. About 5 minutes in, she got back in the car to warm up. I stayed outside. That's when I noticed the weird feeling. Not a sound or anything, just a pressure. Like my ears were popping, except they weren't. The air felt off. Heavy, maybe? Not storm heavy, just strange. I figured maybe I needed to pop my ears, so I swallowed and yawned a few times. Didn't help. She rolled down the window and said, "Do the lights look dim to you?" I looked over. The interior dome light was on since her door hadn't shut all the way, and yeah, it looked lower than normal. Not flickering, not dying, just faint, like it was running on half power. I walked over and opened my door. The dashboard lights were dim too. The radio screen was on, but the numbers looked fuzzy, almost like a dying flashlight. I figured maybe the battery was going bad, which didn't make sense since the car was only 2 years old, but still, we'd had it in for service just a couple months back. I got in and turned the key to start the engine. Nothing. No click, no attempt, not even a starter sound. Just nothing. She looked at me and asked if the battery was dead. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the dash. All the lights faded out completely, one by one, until the whole car went black. I tried the key again. Dead. I even popped the hood and checked the terminals. They were tight, no corrosion, the headlights wouldn't come on, the dome light was out, even the hazard lights wouldn't work. It was like the whole electrical system just shut down at the same time. While I was standing there with the hood open, I heard something weird. It was really faint at first, like the hum of an old refrigerator. I thought it might have been in my head. But she stepped out and said, "Do you hear that?" So it wasn't just me. It was low, but not from any one direction, almost like it was coming from the air itself. Not like a plane overhead or anything mechanical, just this steady vibration, like standing next to a big engine, except there wasn't anything around us. No cars on the road, no buildings, no power lines nearby. I started looking up. The stars were still out, but something felt wrong about the sky. It's hard to explain. There wasn't anything obvious to see, no lights or shapes, but there was this feeling of being watched, like something was above us and we just couldn't see it. She stood next to me, arms crossed, really quiet. Then she said, "My phone's not working." I pulled mine out. No signal, which wasn't too weird. Those mountains have dead zones, but the weird part was the screen. It lit up when I tapped it, but none of the apps would open. Just frozen. Like it was trying to work, but couldn't. I tried to restart it, but it just stayed on the shutdown screen. That hum kept going. Louder, but not in a way that made noise. It just pressed against you. Like it was in your bones. We both got back in the car, didn't say anything, just sat there. That's when I noticed the air had stopped moving. No wind, not even the usual draft you feel when the heater vents are off. The whole car felt sealed, like a vacuum. Our breaths fogged the windows, but they didn't clear. Then everything went dead silent. No bugs, no night birds, no rustle of trees, just absolute stillness, except for that low hum. We sat like that for maybe 5 minutes. It felt like longer. I didn't want to open the door again. I didn't want to look up anymore. I just stared at the dash, hands on the wheel like I was waiting at a red light. Then it all stopped. No buildup, no fade out, just gone. The hum, the pressure, the weird air. The dome light blinked back on by itself. The dash lit up. Her phone vibrated on the console. I turned the key. The engine started like nothing was wrong. We didn't talk the rest of the way home. Not a word. Not until we pulled into the driveway and she finally said, "I don't want to go back there." I nodded. I didn't either. The next morning, I checked the battery with a multimeter. Full charge, clean terminals. I drove the car all week. No issues. I even checked for recalls. Nothing. I didn't mention it to anyone else. Not because I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. I just didn't know how to explain it. We never did go back up that road at night. Even when we took trips out that way, we stuck to the lower routes. I still wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed longer, or gotten out again, or looked straight up. It happened last fall, around mid-October. I'd started jogging at night after work to clear my head. I live in a small town just outside of Asheville, and there's this paved trail that runs along the edge of a wooded park. It's not isolated exactly, but it gets real quiet after 9 p.m., especially on weekdays. That night, I didn't start my run until a little after 10. I remember because I checked my watch at the trailhead, 10:12. It was cold enough that I wore gloves and a hoodie, but not freezing yet. The kind of cold where your breath hangs in the air and the tips of your ears sting after 20 minutes. The path is about 3 miles, with a loop at the end, so I usually run out and back. There are lampposts for the first half mile, and then it's just moonlight and the occasional security light from a house in the distance. No one else was out that night. No cars on the nearby road, no bikes, no other joggers. The first part of the run felt normal. I had my earbuds in, music low enough to still hear my footsteps. About 15 minutes in, I reached the far end of the loop and slowed down to catch my breath. There's a bench there, and I usually pause for a minute before heading back. I stood there breathing, staring off at the tree line. That's when I noticed something. Red light. Not bright. Dim, like taillights through fog, but steady. I thought it was a cell tower at first. There's one a couple miles north, but it's never looked that close, and it didn't blink, just hung there. I pulled out my earbuds and stepped off the trail a bit to get a better view. That's when I saw there were 3 lights, not one. They formed a perfect triangle, wide, maybe the length of a football field across, though it was hard to judge with nothing else lit up around it. They weren't on the tower. They were floating above the trees. The lights didn't move. They just hovered. The triangle wasn't tilted or spinning, just there. Solid. Dead silent. I looked around to see if maybe someone else was nearby, but the woods were dark and still. No wind, no crickets, no branches moving. It was the kind of quiet where your ears start ringing a little. I watched the lights for maybe 30 seconds before one of them slowly rotated around the others. Not fast. Just a smooth motion like a second hand ticking on a big clock. Then it stopped, and another light took its place, rotating the same way. It was like they were taking turns moving. That's when I felt it. This weird pressure in my chest, like standing too close to a speaker, but there was no sound. I don't know how else to explain it. Just a heavy, low thump I couldn't hear but could feel. It came in pulses. I counted 5 of them, spaced about 10 seconds apart. The clouds were rolling in from the west. Thin at first, just wispy streaks, but thickening fast. The moon dimmed behind them, and one by one, the red lights started fading. Not blinking out, fading, like someone slowly turned down a dimmer switch. First, the top one disappeared into the haze. Then the second, lower right. The last one, lower left, held for a moment longer and then vanished, just as a thicker cloud passed through. I stood there for a minute, trying to see if they'd come back, but the sky was fully covered by then. Nothing above but dark gray. Still no sound, not even leaves rustling. Just that pressure feeling, lingering, like it didn't want to leave yet. I finally turned back toward the trail. My legs were cold. I felt stupid standing there, like I was waiting for something that wasn't coming back. I put my earbuds in again, but didn't press play. Just started jogging, fast. I didn't look back. About halfway down the trail, I passed under the first lamppost again. That's when I noticed something else. There was a shape on the path ahead, dark, low to the ground. I slowed, thinking maybe it was a dog or someone sitting. But as I got closer, I saw it wasn't either. It was a pile of leaves, but in a weird spot, right in the middle of the trail, too even, like it had been swept there. There were no other piles like it anywhere nearby. I ran past it, didn't stop. I don't know why, but it bothered me more than it should have. It looked arranged, like someone had meant for it to be there. Back at the parking lot, my car was the only one left. The lot's next to a field, and across that is a small playground with a chain link fence around it. As I was unlocking my door, I caught something in the corner of my eye. Movement near the swings. I turned. Nothing was moving. But one of the swings, the one closest to the fence, was slightly tilted. Not swinging, just tilted like someone had pulled it back and let go, but with no momentum. It just hung there, slightly off-center. I got in the car and locked the doors. On the drive home, my radio wouldn't pick up anything, not even static. I tried scanning through the FM range, then AM. Just silence. The screen lit up like it was working, but no stations. I turned it off after a while. When I got home, Melissa was already asleep. I showered, then checked the weather on my phone, said cloud cover moved in just after 10:40. That lined up, but no reports of anything unusual, no power outages, no aircraft alerts, nothing. I went out the next day and ran the same trail, mid-morning. It all looked normal. No red lights. The pile of leaves was gone. Probably just wind, I told myself. Probably someone else ran through and scattered it. I didn't run at night for a while after that. Not because I was scared exactly. I just couldn't stop thinking about how quiet it got. How something could be right there above the trees, completely still, with no noise. Nothing natural stays that still. Nothing natural rotates like that. I tried looking it up a few times. Drone formations, military tests, stuff like that, but nothing matched. Everything I found either had blinking lights or made noise or wasn't capable of hovering that smoothly for that long. And those lights were too far apart for it to be one drone, unless it wasn't one thing at all. Anyway, I'm back to running during the day now. Still take that trail sometimes, still glance up at the trees when I hit the far loop. Just to check. My wife was the one who saw it first. Not in person, I mean, on the footage. It was a Sunday night, early January, a little after 10. I was in bed half asleep, and she came in holding her phone, looking kind of pale. She didn't say anything at first, just handed it to me and said, "Watch this." It was from our backyard camera. We've got one of those basic security systems, motion-triggered cams, nothing fancy. One's mounted under the eaves, pointing toward the back fence. It's mostly there for peace of mind. We've had raccoons get into the trash, and once a neighbor's dog dug under the gate. The clip started with the usual grainy black and white view of the yard. Nothing moving at first. Then the floodlights blinked on. They're triggered by motion too, and I assumed it was another raccoon or maybe a cat. But that's not what it showed. The lights flickered for a second, which they don't normally do, then came fully on. The camera picked up something standing just past the fence. Tall, thin, right at the edge of where the yard meets the woods. We live on a little half-acre lot that backs up into county forest land, just trees for miles. The thing didn't move. It didn't look like it was walking or turning or anything. It just stood there, perfectly still. I couldn't make out a face. The frame was kind of blown out from the floodlights, so it was just this pale, vertical shape, too tall to be a person, at least 7 feet. Its arms hung real low, long arms almost to the knees. Then the clip cut to the next frame, less than a second later, and it was gone. Just trees and shadows. The lights stayed on, but the thing wasn't there anymore. No movement, no fading out, just not there. I sat up and replayed it a few times. My wife stood next to me, arms crossed, not saying much. I asked if she'd checked the rest of the footage, and she nodded. That was the only trigger all night. We went downstairs and opened the sliding door to the backyard. The lights came on, normal brightness, no flicker. I stepped out in socks and stood by the fence. Nothing looked out of place, no tracks, just patchy grass and a thin layer of frost. We didn't sleep well after that. The next day, I exported the clip to my laptop and tried slowing it down, adjusting the contrast. It didn't help much. The shape didn't sharpen into anything more recognizable. It wasn't a deer, I know that. We get them sometimes, and they move quick, sniff around, twitch their ears, bolt at any noise. This thing wasn't shaped like that. It was upright, way too still. I thought maybe the footage glitched, like maybe the light hit a tree weird or the camera froze for a second. But it didn't feel like a glitch. The lights flickered in and out before and after, but the recording itself played cleanly. 2 nights later, I was up late finishing some work in the den. My wife had gone to bed. Around 1 a.m., I stepped outside to smoke. Only time I do anymore is when I'm stressed. The backyard was quiet, cold again, no wind. I stood near the door under the light, just looking out past the fence. I don't know why, but I had this weird feeling like something was out there. Not like I saw anything, but like being watched. I kept telling myself it was in my head because of the video, but I couldn't shake the thought. I stayed out maybe 5 minutes, then went back in. As soon as I locked the door, the floodlights flicked on behind me. I turned around, heart going fast, but nothing moved. I opened the door again, stepped halfway out, still nothing, just the lights buzzing quietly overhead. I turned in early the next night, didn't go out. The next weird thing happened 3 days later. My wife was getting ready in the morning and called me into the bathroom. She pointed at the mirror, at the fog on the glass. There were streaks in it, vertical lines like finger marks, starting way high up, higher than either of us could reach without standing on something. Not smudges like from our hands, but clean drag marks, almost symmetrical, 4 long ones. No thumb. She thought I was messing with her. I wasn't. I asked if she leaned something against the mirror, like a towel rack or a hanger, but she swore she didn't. I even got a step stool and tried to line up my handprints. Mine didn't match. They were too short. That same day, around noon, our backyard camera triggered again. I got the alert on my phone while I was at work. When I checked the clip, all it showed was the lights flickering on, then the image jolting for a split second, like a shake or impact. Then, nothing, just empty yard. When I got home that night, I walked the fence line with a flashlight. I found a single branch, one of the thinner pine ones, bent sharply down about 6 feet off the ground. Not snapped, just pulled. There weren't any footprints or broken grass, and the ground was still too hard for tracks. The next few nights were quiet. No footage, no alerts. Then Sunday came again. We had dinner with some friends, got back home around 9. The dog, she's a mutt, part shepherd, ran to the back door and just stood there whining. She's never done that before. Normally she'll bark or scratch to go out, but she just stood there, ears up, tail low. I opened the door and tried to coax her out, but she wouldn't go. Just looked at the yard and backed up slowly. Not scared, exactly. More like unsure. That night, we left the back porch light on. I didn't say anything, but my wife and I both agreed to keep the curtains closed, too. At 2:07 a.m., the camera triggered again. This time, the clip was strange in a different way. It started with the lights already on, but not flickering, just steady. The yard was empty, the trees weren't moving, and there wasn't any wind. Then the audio, just background hum, cut out completely for about half a second. Dead silence. The picture didn't change. Nothing entered the frame, but something about it felt off. The shadows shifted a little, like the light bent in the wrong direction for a moment, then snapped back. Like the space was warped. That sounds dumb, I know, but it didn't look right. Then, like the first time, the clip ended. I replayed it a bunch. There's no shape, no figure. Just that feeling again, the one I had outside, like being watched. We turned off the floodlight's motion setting after that. Left it on overnight just as a regular light. It stayed steady, no more flickers, no more triggers. I haven't seen the figure since. Nothing new's shown up on the camera. I still check every morning though, just in case. Some nights the dog still sits by the door and watches the yard without making a sound. When she does that, I don't open the door. I just wait a while and make sure the curtains are closed tight. I got to the field just after sunset. The sky was starting to turn that deep blue you get right before it goes completely dark, and the air had that damp, earthy smell you only get after a dry spell breaks with a little rain. I wasn't in a hurry, just finishing up the day's work. I was planning on checking the fence line and then heading back inside for dinner when I saw the cattle. Usually they're spread out all over the place, slow and lazy by this time of day, grazing or lying down. But that night, they were all bunched together near the center of the field, standing close like they'd been scared of something. Their heads were down, muscles tense, eyes wide, and darting around like they were waiting for something. I've never seen them act like that before. It was the kind of quiet tension you notice right away, even if you don't know what's wrong. I called out to them in my usual way, a soft, low whistle mixed with their names, but they didn't move much, just shifted a little closer, as if trying to protect each other. No mooing, no restless stomping, just this weird frozen stillness, like they were frozen in place but ready to bolt. That's when I saw it. A ring in the grass, maybe 20 feet wide, dead center in the middle of the field. The grass inside was blackened, scorched, and crisp like someone had set it on fire and then left it alone. But the weird part was, there was no ash, no smell of smoke. No burnt smell at all, just that dry, crackly dead grass texture. I circled it a couple of times, trying to find some sign of what caused it, a campfire maybe, a grill, or even a lightning strike, but nothing. No scorch marks outside the ring, no burned branches, nothing. The ground inside the ring was weird too. The dirt was a little darker, almost like it had been steamed or dried out by something hot, but no one had been there to kick up dust or disturb it. I even looked for footprints around it, but the dirt was clean, like it hadn't been walked on for days. The cattle didn't seem hurt, no cuts or burns, and their coats were fine, just spooked. I kept looking around, half expecting to find some reason for it all, but nothing added up. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs of people or animals nearby that could explain why they'd all gathered there and why the grass was burned like that. I decided to leave the ring alone and got closer to the cattle. I spoke to them softly again, and after a few minutes they started to relax. A couple even took a tentative step forward, grazing the grass just outside the ring like they knew better than to go inside it. I wasn't about to force them. When I turned back to the house, I felt this strange heaviness settle over me. I thought about calling my neighbor, but didn't want to sound crazy. We all live out here because we like quiet and no trouble. This wasn't normal, and it didn't feel like something to joke about. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing what sounded like low humming, barely noticeable, but there, almost like the field itself was breathing. I got up a few times and looked out the window toward the pasture. The moon was high and cast pale light on the grass, but the ring wasn't visible from that far away. Still, every time I blinked, I felt like I was seeing something moving just at the edge of my vision. Something I couldn't quite focus on. The next morning, I went back out with the sunlight, hoping the strange feeling would fade. But the ring was still there, the grass the same burnt black, and the cattle were back to their usual slow, lazy ways like nothing had happened. I thought maybe I'd imagined some of it, the humming, the feeling of being watched. But then I noticed the ground right outside the ring. The grass there was bent flat, like something heavy had pressed down on it and then lifted. It didn't make sense, but I knew I hadn't seen or heard anything that could have done that. I spent the next few days keeping an eye on the field, waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. No footprints, no other strange marks, no weird noises. Just the same old cattle grazing in a pasture with a weird, dead ring in the middle. I didn't tell anyone. Not really. No point in causing a fuss. Sometimes I catch myself staring at that spot when I'm outside, wondering if something was there or if I just got caught up in one of those things you can't explain. The cattle never go near it now, and neither do I. It feels like the kind of place you just leave alone. That's the story. I don't have an answer for it. I just know it happened. I woke up because it felt like someone was shining a flashlight in my eyes. At first I thought it was the moon, but then I realized it wasn't moving at all. It was this sharp, narrow beam of white light cutting straight down through the tree branches right above my tent. The forest around me was dark except for that beam, and it didn't flicker or change, just steady, like a spotlight locked in place. I lay there for a minute, frozen, trying to figure out what the hell I was seeing. I mean, I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest road, no towns or cars or anything that could explain it. I didn't hear any noise either. No hum, no buzzing, no helicopter or plane engines, nothing. Just this perfect beam of light, bright enough to shine through the leaves and cast weird, long shadows on the ground. I grabbed my phone, but it was dead. No signal, no battery left. Forgot to charge it before I left town. So I couldn't even call anyone or take a picture. I debated waking my friend, who was camping a little ways off, but I didn't want to freak him out over what might be just a weird flashlight or someone messing around. I slowly unzipped my tent, poked my head out, and the beam was still there, no change. It was like it was focused on a single spot, right in the middle of a clearing, maybe 50 feet away. I stood up carefully, trying not to make noise, and took a step toward the light. As soon as I moved, the beam vanished, just cut out like someone flipped a switch. No fading, no dimming, gone completely. I blinked, confused, and looked around. Nothing, just the dark forest again, silent and still. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, or it was some kind of weird trick of the light, but my heart was pounding. I tried moving toward where it had been a couple more times, but every time I stepped closer, the light snapped off. It was like it was watching me, or maybe waiting for me to stop moving. I stayed still for a while, just staring into the spot where the light had been. Then I noticed something else. The air felt off, like it was heavier or thicker somehow. It wasn't cold or hot, just weird, like the forest had been holding its breath. The next thing I noticed was the silence, not just the usual quiet of the woods at night, but a different kind of silence. No crickets, no wind rustling through the leaves, no distant owl or anything. It was like all the usual sounds had been sucked out. That alone felt wrong. I could hear my own breathing loud in my ears. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and started walking back toward my tent, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. The darkness felt too complete, like it wasn't just night, but like the forest was blank and watching me. Back at my tent, I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on. The beam was narrow and sharp, cutting through the black, but nothing was there. No light anywhere else. I swept the beam around the clearing and the trees, but everything was normal. The forest looked the same as always. No signs of anything strange or out of place. No footprints, no broken branches, no weird glows or shapes. I went back inside the tent and zipped it up. Tried to calm down, but my mind kept going back to that light. I felt like I wasn't alone out there, even though I didn't hear or see anything. I lay back down and eventually fell asleep. But when I woke up a few hours later, the sky was starting to lighten, and everything looked normal again. No trace of the beam, no feeling of that heavy air, no silence. Just regular forest sounds, birds waking up, wind in the leaves. I packed up and left right after sunrise, not waiting for my friend to wake up. I didn't say anything about it at the time, mostly because I wasn't sure what I'd even say. It was just too strange. I've told a couple of close friends since, but it always sounds crazy when I say it out loud. There's this spot in the woods where the light had been, though, and sometimes when I think about it, I wonder if it's still there, watching, waiting. But every time I try to imagine going back, I find a reason not to. That's it. Just me, the light, and a silence that didn't belong. I was working the night shift at this office complex security job, just a regular overnight gig to make some extra cash. Nothing fancy, mostly just watching cameras and making rounds every couple of hours. The building's a pretty standard place, big parking lot, a few offices, some empty spots most nights, quiet for the most part. That night started out like any other. I clocked in around 11 p.m., grabbed my coffee, and settled into the security office. The place is small, with a bank of monitors showing all the cameras. Entrances, hallways, the parking lot. Usually it's just static views of empty parking spaces and dark asphalt. Sometimes you catch a stray car driving by, or someone locking up late, but not much else. Around 1:30 a.m., I was scrolling through the parking lot cameras, just checking for anything odd. It was a clear night, stars out, and the lot was mostly empty. Maybe a dozen cars parked. I noticed something strange on the main lot camera. At first, it looked like a shadow moving over the cars, but it wasn't just a regular shadow from a cloud or anything natural. It had a distinct shape, triangular, and it moved in a way that didn't make sense with any passing car or airplane. The weird part was that none of the car's motion sensors went off. The parking lot has these lights that flick on when something moves nearby. Pretty sensitive usually, but the lights stayed off even as this shadow moved slowly, smoothly across the entire lot. It was like it was hovering just above the cars, casting this huge dark triangle over them. I leaned in, trying to get a better look. The shadow glided from the far corner of the lot toward the building, steady and quiet. It didn't cast any light or reflect anything, just this flat, black shape moving without sound. Then the feed cut out, just went black. I checked the other cameras, but the main lot view was gone. The clock on the monitor showed the time. The feed was dead for exactly 12 seconds. No glitch, no static, nothing, just blank. When it came back, the shadow was gone, the parking lot looked normal again, and all the lights were back to their usual off state. I stared at the screen for a minute, trying to figure out if it was a camera malfunction. But the other cameras were fine, and the feed timing was weird. Exactly 12 seconds down, no more, no less, like something had interrupted the signal on purpose, or maybe cut the feed. After that, I started scanning the footage frame by frame, rewinding and playing slow motion. The shadow was definitely there before the blackout, moving in a way no car or plane could, and after the blackout, there was no sign of it, no changes in the parking lot, no damage, no cars moving or anything. I called the day shift supervisor the next morning, asked if anyone had been in or out overnight, or if they knew anything about the cameras cutting out. He said nothing unusual was reported, no other camera issues. The system logs didn't show any errors or tampering either. That whole night, I kept checking the cameras, expecting something else, but nothing like that happened again. The rest of my shift was pretty uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like something was hovering just out of sight. I don't know what that shadow was. I don't know why the cameras cut out exactly when it passed, and I don't know why the motion sensors never triggered. It didn't make a sound, didn't leave a trace, just appeared for a few minutes, then disappeared like it wasn't there at all. I kept working nights after that, but I avoided that camera angle whenever I could. Something about that triangle, the way it moved, and the silence around it just didn't feel right. I noticed it the morning after that weird lightning storm we had. It wasn't even a real storm, just a few sharp flashes around 2 or 3 in the morning. No thunder, no rain, just light. Enough to wake me up and make the dogs bark, but nothing came of it. I figured it was heat lightning or maybe transformers blowing somewhere, though I didn't hear any pops. Didn't think much of it until the next morning. I was walking the north pasture around 7, checking the fence line like I do every day. That part of the property's flat and mostly open, about 4 acres of grazing field, nothing fancy. We've had a dry summer, so the grass had been yellowing, but still thick and tall in most spots. As I came over the little rise near the southeast corner, I saw something off about 50 yards out. The color looked wrong. It was a square, dead center in the pasture, about 20 feet by 20, just sitting there like someone had laid carpet down. The grass in that square wasn't just dry or scorched, it was gray, a flat, dull gray, like someone had drained all the color out of it. Not patchy, completely uniform. The edges were sharp as a knife, perfect right angles, no feathering or fade. I walked up to it real slow. Not because I was scared, but because it looked fake, like some kind of prank or trick on the eyes. But the closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The grass was standing straight up, same height as the rest of the field, but the blades were stiff and dry, almost like wire. I touched one and it snapped off between my fingers. Not crunchy like dead grass usually is, brittle like plastic, and cold. It was already pushing 80 degrees out and the sun had been up for an hour, but that square was noticeably cooler. No dew either. even though the rest of the pasture had a light sheen on it. I tried pulling a handful up. The roots came clean, no resistance, and underneath it the dirt looked pale. Not white, exactly, but washed out like the soil had been bleached. The weirdest part? No bugs. No ants, no beetles, no worms. Just nothing. I dug down a couple inches with my pocket knife and didn't see a single living thing. The cows wouldn't go near it. They usually wander all over that pasture in the mornings, but that day they were clustered at the far end, just standing still, looking in that direction. Not grazing, not moving around, just watching. That afternoon, I tried bringing the dogs out. I had two at the time, both mutts, both curious as hell about everything. But as soon as we got within maybe 20 feet, they stopped. One of them started whining, tail between her legs, and the other growled low and steady, like he saw something I didn't. They both backed away, pulling at their leashes, wouldn't go any closer. The next day the wind picked up, gusty and dry, the kind of wind that usually lays the tall grass flat in waves. But that gray square didn't move. Not a single blade shifted. I stood out there for 10 minutes watching it, and the grass all around it bent and swayed, but the square stayed perfectly still, like it was sealed off from everything around it. I didn't tell anyone right away, partly because I figured it might go away on its own, and partly because I didn't want to sound like I was losing it. I took a photo with my phone, but it didn't come out right. It looked like a shadow in the picture, nothing like what I saw with my own eyes. The gray didn't show up. It just looked darker, like the grass had been matted down. A few nights later, I woke up to this buzzing sound. Not loud, but constant, like static or distant power lines. I figured maybe something was wrong with the barn's breaker panel, so I went out with a flashlight. The sound wasn't coming from the barn, it was coming from the pasture. I followed it all the way to the ridge. As soon as I crested the little hill, the sound stopped, just gone. Not faded, not distant, like someone flipped a switch. That square was glowing, not bright, just a faint pale shimmer like moonlight on frost. It wasn't casting light on anything around it, no shadows, no reflection, but the grass itself was giving off this weird soft glow, almost white blue. I stood there maybe 50 feet away off, just staring at it. I didn't go closer. I don't know why exactly. It wasn't fear, not like being scared of a bear or something. More like pressure. Like I wasn't supposed to. After a few minutes, the glow faded and the buzzing came back for just a second, then cut out again. I walked back to the house without turning around once. The next morning, I found the fence near that side was down. 3 posts snapped clean near the base, like something had pushed straight through without slowing down. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. The cows were still at the far end, all bunched together and wide-eyed. One of them had cut its side open somehow, long, shallow scrape like it had tried to get away from something fast. I called the vet and she patched her up, said it didn't look like a fence injury. Too clean, too smooth. After that, I put up some temporary electric wire around the square, just a couple strands on stakes. Not to keep anything out really, but more to mark the boundary. I didn't want to forget where it started. About a week later, I noticed something new. In the center of the square, the grass had started to lay flat, not crushed or trampled, just folded. In a spiral, clockwise, tight at the center and widening as it went out. Perfectly even. You'd think someone used a rake and a compass. It didn't happen gradually. It wasn't there in the morning, but by late afternoon it was fully formed. I didn't touch it. That night, I sat up late on the porch, keeping watch. Around 2:30, the buzzing started again. This time, it was louder. Still not painful, but steady and low, like it was vibrating under the ground. I stayed where I was, looking out over the field. No lights, no shapes, just that sound. Then the porch light flickered. Once, then again, then went out completely. Same with the floodlight over the barn. Everything went dead quiet, except the buzzing. I waited. 10, maybe 15 minutes. Then everything came back on at once. Lights, fridge hum, even the ceiling fan inside. I walked out to the edge of the field and looked toward the square. Couldn't see anything from there, but I felt it. Same pressure, like the air was heavier around it. The next day, the spiral was gone. Grass was still gray, still brittle, but the pattern had vanished, replaced by something else, a grid. Not drawn in the dirt, laid into the grass itself. Square sections, each maybe 2 feet wide, arranged perfectly across the entire area, like a chessboard, only every square was the same gray color. The only difference was texture. Some were laid flat, others stood straight up, alternating. It made my head hurt to look at it. I gave up trying to make sense of it. I just kept walking the fence, keeping the animals away, watching. After about 3 weeks, it started to fade. The color came back first, slowly like water soaking through paper, then the texture softened. Grass stopped snapping under my boots. Bugs came back. I saw a bird land near the edge and not freak out. The dogs stopped growling when we got close. One morning I walked right up to it and it was just grass again. Still a little paler than the rest of the field, but alive. No spiral, no grid, no glow. It never spread. Never came back. But every now and then, when I walk the fence early in the morning, I get this metallic taste in my mouth near that spot, like I bit a piece of tinfoil. It goes away after a few seconds. No sound, no lights, just that weird taste. I don't graze the animals there anymore. I let the grass grow tall, let the wind push it around like normal. Nothing strange has happened since, but I keep the temporary fence up, just in case. We were out in this remote valley running a survey on behalf of the state's environmental agency. Nothing special really, just a few days with the drone, mapping plant growth, tracking soil changes, that kind of stuff. The place was empty for miles around. No houses, no roads, just wide open land with some scrub and low hills. Perfect for our work. I was the one flying the drone, and my partner, Lisa, was handling data collection and logging. We'd set the drone to hover over certain spots for thermal scans, and then we'd check the footage later on the computer. We'd like to be thorough, making sure nothing slipped by. On the third day, we were about halfway through the survey when I noticed something odd. The drone was flying over this broad, flat part of the valley, a place we'd labeled Sector C. According to the GPS coordinates, it should have been about 200 feet above the ground, like normal. Later that evening, when we were reviewing the data, I spotted it. On the thermal feed, there was a weird shape hanging there in the middle of the valley, right at 200 feet. It didn't look like anything natural. No animals, no heat signatures that matched any known sources. Just this smooth, dark shape hovering, completely still. The weirdest part, when I pulled up the drone's live video footage from the same time, the object wasn't there. The camera footage showed nothing. Just empty valley, some rocks, a few scattered bushes. No shadows, no reflections, nothing. I ran the footage over and over, checking timestamps, adjusting brightness and contrast. The thermal image was clear. The shape was definitely there, but the visual camera never saw it. Lisa got interested too. She's more into the tech side than me, so she dug into the drone's sensor data logs. The thermal sensor detected something with zero heat output. I mean zero. Normally, even a rock warmed by the sun would show some heat. This thing didn't. It was like a black hole for heat. We went back out the next day, tried to catch it live. We flew the drone over Sector C again, hovering at the same altitude and time. Nothing showed up on either camera or thermal sensors. It was just empty. That night, I stared at the footage again. The shape seemed to shift slightly from frame to frame, almost like it was watching us back. But that could have just been my mind playing tricks. The rest of the week went by with nothing unusual. The valley stayed quiet, the drone worked fine. Still, the thought of that shape stuck with me. What creeped me out more was the timing. When I checked the drone's flight logs, there was a strange 5-minute gap where the GPS signal dropped, and the drone drifted slightly off course. The weird shape showed up exactly during that gap. The drone's software said everything was fine, but the logs told a different story. Lisa and I argued about whether to report it or not. The agency wanted solid proof, and all we had was this glitchy data with a ghostly shape in the thermal feed. No video evidence. No other sensors picked up anything. Just that one weird silent silhouette. By the time we packed up and left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Not hostile or aggressive, but present. Like the valley itself was holding its breath. I still look back at that footage sometimes. The shape never moves like anything normal. It just hangs there, silent and cold, visible only in heat, but giving off no heat at all. I don't know what we caught on that drone, but whatever it wasn't meant to be seen. And maybe that's why the camera never showed it. It happened about 4 years ago, mid-October. I was driving back from my brother's place outside of Jackson. He'd invited me over to help fix a busted fence post on his property, and we ended up having a couple beers after. I wasn't drunk or anything, 2 bottles over the course of 3 hours, just tired. I left around 10:30, figured I'd be home by a little after midnight. It's about a 90-minute drive, mostly back roads. I took Route 43 the same way I always do. That stretch between Pine Hollow and Lakewood gets real quiet at night. It's all woods and farmland, and you can go 10, 15 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. There's one gas station halfway, but it's usually closed by 9. I had the radio on low, just enough to fill the silence. I remember checking the time at 11:47. I know that exactly because the song playing was Wicked Game, and I thought it was weird to hear that so late on a rock station. Right after that, I came around this long bend just past mile marker 214, the one where the shoulder drops off into a ditch. I know that bend well. That's where it happened. I felt this weird pressure in my ears, like I was gaining altitude too fast. Not painful, just sudden. Then they popped, like when you're in a plane. At the exact same moment, every hair on my arm stood up. No exaggeration. Full goosebumps, both arms, back of my neck. I blinked, and it was like the road jumped. Not in a jolt or anything. I didn't swerve. I didn't feel the car lurch or lose traction. It just shifted. The bend was gone. I was suddenly on a straightaway about 4 or 5 miles down from where I'd just been. I know that part of the road, too. There's this crooked mailbox with reflectors on the left and a busted wooden fence on the right. I recognized both immediately. That alone would have been enough to freak me out. But then I glanced at the clock on my dash. It said 12:04. 17 minutes had passed. Just gone. I slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder, put it in park. I sat there with the engine idling, just staring at the clock like maybe it would correct itself. It didn't. I reached for my phone to double check, and it matched. 12:04, now 12:05. I hadn't zoned out. I didn't fall asleep at the wheel. I was fully awake, hands at 10 and 2. I remembered the bend, the song, the pressure in my ears, and then I was somewhere else, with no memory of the drive in between. I checked my gas gauge. The needle had dropped slightly, like I had been driving normally. Not idling, not stopped, like the car had kept moving the whole time. I got out and looked around with my flashlight. There weren't any skid marks or signs I'd hit something. No animals, no debris, just a quiet, dark road and a couple of bugs hitting my windshield. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a good 15 minutes before going inside. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't feel sick or disoriented, just rattled. I kept thinking I'd remember something if I gave it enough time, like maybe I'd blanked from fatigue. But I never got anything back. Just that 1 second I was coming out of the curve, and the next I was miles down the road. The next morning, I checked the mileage on my car. It lined up. I hadn't skipped distance, just time. I told myself maybe I'd misread the clock before, but I know I didn't. I remember thinking how weird it was that they were playing Chris Isaak right before midnight. That's not something I would have imagined. For a couple days after, I kept thinking about the pressure in my ears. It wasn't subtle. It was like something shifted in the air around me. I even Googled stuff about barometric pressure changes and freak weather events, but nothing lined up with that part of the state that night. A few nights later, I went back out to that stretch around the same time. I don't know what I was hoping for, maybe to feel something similar or prove to myself it was nothing. I drove slow, windows cracked, radio off. Nothing happened. No ear pressure, no missing time. Just the same empty road and my headlights catching bits of gravel and roadside weeds. But when I passed that same stretch near mile marker 214, I noticed something off. There was a spot on the right shoulder where the gravel looked different. Not fresh exactly, but disturbed, like someone had raked it. A smooth, even pattern that didn't match the rest of the road. No tire tracks, no footprints, just a 6-foot wide patch that looked wiped. I didn't stop, I just kept going. The last thing, and this might mean nothing, is that ever since that night, my dash clock's been off. Just a few seconds behind my phone at first, but it drifts more every week. I've reset it 3 times. It won't stay synced. I don't know what that means. Maybe nothing, but it didn't do that before.